الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله جليل النعم، باعث الهمم، ذي الجود والكرم، والصلاة والسلام على خير البرية محمد بن عبد الله وعلى صحبه ومن اتبع هدى. الضيوف الكرام كلا باسمه ولقبه، تحية من القلب يطيب شذاها مسكا وريحان، وتحمل في طياتها حبا واحترام. أيها الجمع الكريم، أهلا وسهلا بكم في مؤتمر الامتثال الفعال لمكافحة الجرائم المالية. يأتي هذا المؤتمر إيمانا من جمعية المحاسبين القانونيين القطرية ومعهد الامتثال العالمي GCI بأن التقنيات وأساليب الجريمة الحديثة تستدعي تبادلات الخبرات والمعارف والتعاون بين الجهات المعنية كافة لمكافحتها. 1 زائد 1 يساوي 100، 1 زائد 1 يساوي 11. هل هذا صحيح؟ كيف؟ ومتى؟ ولماذا؟ أليس الواقع هو أن 1 زائد 1 يساوي 2؟ أنتم معي أم لا؟ هناك شبهات، مكاسب غير قانونية، جرائم مالية شرسة مصدرها مرعب، أموال محرمة، انتهاكات للقانون. ما هو دورنا؟ نعم، ما هو دورنا في الحد من مخاطرها؟ يستعرض مؤتمر اليوم طبيعة جرائم المالية وأثرها على استقرار الأنظمة المالية ومكافحة هذه الجرائم. ننوه عناية سادة الحضور أن هناك ترجمة باللغتين، اللغة العربية واللغة الإنجليزية. نفتتحها مع كلمة الدكتور هاشم عبد الرحيم السيد، رئيس مجلس الإدارة جمعية المحاسبين القانونيين القطرية، فليتفضل مشكور.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين. أما بعد، أرفع رايات الشكر والامتنان إلى سعادة الشيخ الدكتور فالح بن ناصر آل ثاني وزير البيئة والتغير المناخي على دعمه ورعايته للمؤتمر، والشكر موصول لجميع الحضور الأفاضل في مؤتمركم الامتثال الفعال لمكافحة الجرائم المالية. أصحاب السعادة السيدات والسادة، تمثل عملية الامتثال العمود الفقري للقطاع المالي في ظل الأزمات المالية والتقلبات الاقتصادية التي يمر بها العالم من أزمة جيوسياسية وأزمة طاقة وأزمة سلاسل الإمداد والتوريد وأزمة الغذاء وأزمة الوباء وأزمة التضخم والركود التضخمي وتراجعات النمو العالمي، والأزمة التي لم تخرج بكل ظلالها الاحتباس الحراري وتغير المناخ. لذا أخذت الدول على حماية أنظمتها المالية عن طريق التشريعات والقوانين، فضلا عن ضرورة الالتزام بتعليمات ومعايير الهيئات والمؤسسات الدولية. ومن هنا تواجه الخدمات المالية حزمة كبيرة من التنظيمات والقوانين، مما أدى إلى زيادة حجم المسؤولية على الأجهزة المالية، وأصبحت مخاطر عدم الامتثال الهاجس الأكبر لدى الجهات الرقابية والإشرافية، وذلك لمعرفة مدى التجانس بين القانون والممارسة. وقد كان للتطور الهائل في التقنيات الحديثة ونظم المعلومات وما صاحبه من طفرة كبيرة في الخدمات الرقمية والتحرر المالي في الدول الأثر الأكبر في زيادة عمليات الجرائم المالية، فقد جلب هذا التطور معه العديد من المخاطر والتحديات، فتطورت الجريمة وتعددت وتنوعت أساليب ارتكابها. ويكفي أن نعرف أن حجم الجرائم المالية يمثل القطاع الثالث على مستوى العالم. فإذا كان حجم الاقتصاد الأمريكي يشكل 23 تريليون دولار والاقتصاد الصيني 17 تريليون دولار، فإن حجم الجرائم المالية بأنواعها المختلفة يبلغ 7 تريليون دولار، وبذلك تجاوز حجم الاقتصاد الياباني ويمثل 7.4% من الناتج العالمي. وتتنوع هذه الجرائم بين الابتزاز والتزوير والاحتيال واختراقات المالية والحسابات المزيفة والفساد والغش وغسل الأموال وتمويل الإرهاب، وأن أكثر الفئات العمرية التي تتعرض للجرائم المالية ما دون 30 عاما، تبلغ نسبتها 41% من الجرائم المالية، وينتج عنها أضرار اقتصادية ومالية وأمنية واجتماعية تطال بأثرها استقرار الدول. وهي من الجرائم الخطرة كونها تصنف على أنها منظمة وعابرة للحدود، وتشكل تهديد خطير للمجتمع الدولي، مما فرض على الجهات المعنية البحث عن وسائل مكافحة أكثر مواجهة الجريمة، بالإضافة إلى التطبيقات الذكية والتكنولوجيا الحديثة مثل الهوية الرقمية والبلوكشين والبيانات السحابية وتطبيقات الذكاء الاصطناعي في الإنذار المبكر عن مخاطر وتهديدات عدم الامتثال، فضلا عن تكثيف التوعية بخطورة هذه الجرائم، وهو حائط الصد الأول لمكافحتها والحد من آثارها. أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة، لقد وضعت دولة قطر استراتيجية وطنية لمكافحة هذه الجرائم، وتشهد هذه الاستراتيجية تعاونا كاملا بين جميع جهات أنفاذ القانون في الدولة من أجل حماية الاقتصاد والمجتمع من هذا النوع من الجرائم. وتقوم هذه الاستراتيجية على توعية وتطبيق العناية الواجبة في مكافحة الجريمة وفقا لأفضل المسارات والتدابير، وخصوصا على صعيد التشريعات والقوانين والتعليمات والممارسة والإشراف والرقابة وغيرها من الإجراءات التي تعزز التزامها بالمعايير ذات الصلة، الأمر الذي يجعل منها نموذجا فاعلا في هذا المجال. وقد حرصنا في جمعية المحاسبين القانونيين القطرية على طرح هذا الموضوع في ظل ما تشهدها من متغيرات اقتصادية وسياسية، وكذلك استضافة دولة قطر لبطولة كأس العالم وما يصاحبها من دخول أعداد كبيرة من فئات عمرية وجنسيات مختلفة وتفاعل المؤسسات المشاركة للحدث الكبير. لذا إيمانا من الجمعية بمسؤوليتها المجتمعية وضرورة زيادة الوعي المجتمعي في مواجهة الجريمة، حيث أن مكافحة الجرائم المالية والمصرفية يتطلب تنمية التعاون والشراكة مع كافة الأطراف. وفي الختام أشكر وزارة التنمية الاجتماعية والأسرة وعلى رأسهم سعادة الوزيرة على جهودها، وكذلك القائمين في الوزارة على دعمهم المتواصل للجمعية، والشكر لرعاة المؤتمر وزارة البيئة والتغير المناخي وبنك قطر الوطني وبنك الدوحة وشركة قطر للإيداع المركزي للأوراق المالية وهيئة قطر للأسواق المالية وشريكنا الاستراتيجي معهد الامتثال العالمي GCI. كما أحيي هذه الوجوه النيرة التي تواجدت اليوم في هذا المؤتمر، والذي أتمنى أن نخرج منه بمرئيات وتوصيات نرفعها لأصحاب القرار والمسؤولين من أجل العمل سويا على خدمة المجتمع والنهوض به نحو التنمية المستدامة. ونختم بقول المؤسس رحمه الله: ونحمدك يا ذا العرش والملك والعطاء ونرضي بحكمك على جميع الفعايل، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
والآن مع كلمة السيدة نولا لنان رئيس قسم التطوير وإدارة الأعمال بمعهد الامتثال العالمي GCI.
Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished guests and speakers, good morning to you all and welcome to today's conference on effective compliance in combating financial crimes. It's my pleasure to be a moderator for this conference today with representatives from governments, agencies, financial institutions and subject matter experts from across the globe. I would like to open with thanking our esteemed guests, Mr. Faisal Youssef Al-Bafaya from Doha Bank and Riyad Al-Fayek from QNB Group for giving us their valuable time today. Your support has helped to make this event a great success. I would also like to thank our sponsors, the Qatar Financial Markets Authority, the Qatar Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, Doha Bank, QNB, and the Qatar Central Securities Depository. And of course, QCPA and Dr. Hashim Al-Sayed, for enabling this special event to take place. And finally, I would like to thank this beautiful hotel, the Ritz-Carlton Doha, for hosting our event today. Thank you.
ونكمل مع كلمة السيد رياض الفياش رئيس الامتثال ومكافحة الجرائم المالية والحوكمة ببنك قطر الوطني QMB.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome everyone and thank you for making this event happen. Today I'm going to address two main points on the financial crimes. Firstly, the impact and implications of implications of the financial crimes and the increasing role of the different actors responsible for its fight. And secondly, the roles of data, technology, and collaboration in fighting financial crime amid the fast-changing and more complex global financial landscape. As you all know, financial crimes threaten the security, stability, and integrity of the economic and financial system and of the society as a whole. Financial crimes, together with cybersecurity, are becoming an extremely hot topic for financial institutions. This is mainly due to their implications and impact they might have both financially and, most importantly, on the reputation. If we take a quick look to the penalties imposed on financial institutions over the past 10 years, we can notice that not only their impact was disastrous in terms of penalties imposed, but only the amount of time, efforts, and investments put in place to recover from deterioration of reputation, the efforts in terms of human resources, technology investments, and money are extremely important and are extremely demanding. Usually financial institutions, correspondent banks mainly, they do pay special attention to what's going on in any country, its financial institutions, to decide whether to continue or establish relationships with these financial institutions. The impact of financial crimes is not only limited to the financial institutions, but also to the countries and regulators where they operate, since failure to properly implement a robust financial crime compliance framework is also regarded as a failure by the countries and regulators to put in place and enforce strong compliance regulations and culture. Over the past 30 months, fraud and cybercrime have continued to proliferate, particularly due to the unprecedented challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. The extended scope of financial crimes and the continuously evolving and developing trends are considered an important challenge for all parties responsible for combating financial crimes. The responsibilities of all the operators are more and more at the verge, ranging from the regulators, relevant authorities, financial institutions, and the public. But it's not only this. In the past 10 years, there is an increasing focus on tackling the predicate offenses. So it's not only following the revenues of the financial crimes, but also tackling the predicate offenses. And that's why we've noted that FATF are more and more interested in issuing new recommendations and standards in response to the threats and activities of the contemporary financial system. Among us, these important developments is the increasing importance of non-financial sectors, known also as gatekeeping industries that play an important role in controlling the flow of the funds. Broad range of activities undertaken in non-financial sector is covered by the recommendations of the FATF, which require regulation of services provided by sectors termed as DNFBPs, designated non-financial business and professions. Obviously, auditors and accountants are part of this category. Regulations applicable to DNFBPs involve requirements to identify, assess, and take preventive actions to mitigate any risks of being involved with facilitating the transfer of illicit proceeds for money laundering or terrorist financing. One of the main requirements that is applicable to both financial institutions and DNFBPs, so we are kind of partners in this fight, is the completion of CDD, customer due diligence measures, when dealing with a new client. This process involves obtaining and verifying specific details, whether they are an individual or legal entity referred to as KYC, Know Your Customer or Know Your Client requirements, as well as some other elements where there is an elevated risk. Another point which is common between FIs and DNFBBs is the obligation to maintain records of all transactions with their clients and to ensure the information is readily available in the event that they are subject to an information request based on any kind of investigation. Second point I'm going to address today is the innovative ways of tackling financial crime, collaboration powered by data, technology, and analytics. With the increase in attention, countries and relevant authorities are giving to combating financial crimes, compliance officers and other actors' role is becoming more complex as the design of an adequate financial crime compliance framework needed to deal with development trends of financial crimes and more complex tools and technologies being deployed. Fortunately, the same technology being abused for illicit purposes do offer us a wide range of solutions and systems to tackle and to combat financial crimes. Particularly, new technologies have the potential to make AML and CFT faster, cheaper, and more effective. They can improve the implementation of the regulatory standards to advance global AML CFT efforts and ensure financial inclusion. It means that to avoid unintended consequences such as financial exclusion. Actually, new technologies do offer us the opportunity to focus on the highest risk areas, usually not desired by the banks, and some customer segments or some products are usually not very welcomed by banks. This is financial exclusion. The new technologies do offer us the opportunity to focus on the highest risk of products and customers, hence to achieve financial inclusion. Technology can facilitate data collection, processing, and analysis, and help actors identify and manage money laundering and terrorist financing. Faster payment and transactions, more accurate identification systems, monitoring, record keeping, and information sharing between competent authorities and regulated entities also do offer advantages. A new concept, which is more and more noted on board, is big data. Actually, financial institutions gain a clear understanding through the use of big data, which are very important and very useful in identifying the trail of illegal gains from activities such as drugs, arms, human trafficking, slavery, corruption, fraud, and many other crimes in order to establish the individuals and the supply chains. The increased use of digital solutions for AML CFT based on artificial intelligence and its different subsets like machine learning, natural language processing, can potentially help to better identify risk and respond to, communicate, and monitor suspicious activity. Just as a matter of reference, in July 2021, FATF has issued a report on data pooling, collaborative analytics, and data protection, which focuses on the same issues, identifying appropriate tools and technologies and optimizing their use at different stages of AML CFT. A final word on collaboration. Everyone, financial institutions, regulators, and law enforcement have to continuously identify and embrace new ways of doing things, leveraging on technology, data, and network analytics in the fight against financial crime. Wish this event a great success and looking forward to fruitful interactions. Thank you so much.
شكرا للسيد رياض الفياش. والآن مع كلمة السيد فيصل يوسف أبو 2000 نائب رئيس قسم الشؤون القانونية ببنك الدوحة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السادة الحضور الكرام، بداية يسرني أن أرحب بجميع الحاضرين وأتوجه بالشكر الخاص إلى جمعية المحاسبين القانونيين القطرية ومعهد الامتثال العالمي على جهودهم في تنظيم هذا المؤتمر المميز الذي يتناول موضوع الامتثال الفعال في مكافحة الجرائم المالية، وهي من أهم المسائل والتحديات التي لها تأثير على الاستقرار المالي والاقتصادي للأنظمة والمجتمعات والدول. وبالأصالة عن نفسي ونيابة عن بنك الدوحة، يسر بنك الدوحة أن يكون أحد رعاة هذا المؤتمر دعما منه لمثل هذه المبادرات البناءة التي تسعى بدورها إلى تبادل الرأي والخبرات للارتقاء إلى أفضل الممارسات والوسائل التي تدعم الامتثال الفعال والحد من الجرائم المالية. السادة الحضور، يشكل هذا المؤتمر فرصة لتسليط الضوء على المخاطر التي تواجهها المجتمعات والأنظمة المالية من جراء ارتكاب الجرائم المالية وتعزيز سبل مكافحتها في ظل التطور التكنولوجي والتقنيات الحديثة التي جلبت معها العديد من المخاطر والتحديات. فتطورت معها الجريمة وتعددت وتنوعت أساليب ارتكابها مستفيدة مما أتاحته التكنولوجيا من وسائل متعددة ومبتكرة. الأمر الذي يتطلب من الجميع القيام بخطوات استباقية وتطوير أنظمته بشكل دوري وفعال لمواكبة تطور أساليب هذه الجريمة وتوحيد الجهود من أجل مواجهتها والحد منها. كما يتوجب على المؤسسات المالية تطوير أدواتها باستمرار لفهم مخاطر هذه الجريمة بكافة أنواعها وتبني ابتكارات التكنولوجيا الحديثة وتطبيق العناية الواجبة في مكافحتها. ولا بد من الإشارة والشكر هنا للجهود الكبيرة التي تبذلها دولة قطر على صعيد مكافحة الجرائم المالية وسن التشريعات والقوانين الحديثة وتطوير التشريعات المعمول بها لمواكبة ومكافحة تطور الجرائم المالية. كما أن استمرار الشراكة والتعاون بين القطاعين العام والخاص والجهات الرقابية والأمنية وتنسيق وتوحيد الجهود تعتبر من ضروريات مواجهة هذه الجريمة ومحاربتها والحد منها. سادة الحضور، يعتبر هذا المؤتمر فرصة قيمة للمختصين والمهنيين في الدولة والمنطقة للحضور ومناقشة أحدث سبل مكافحة الجرائم المالية والتعرف على أهمية الامتثال للمعايير الدولية في مكافحتها. ونؤكد على ضرورة استمرار عقد مثل هذه المؤتمرات وورش العمل التي تساهم بشكل فعال في نشر الوعي والمعرفة وتشارك الخبرات والتجارب بين أفراد المجتمع وبالأخص العاملين في المجال المالي والمصرفي، وتعريفهم بهذه الجريمة وأشكالها المتطورة وتزويدهم بالمعنى الحقيقي والصحيح للجريمة المالية وصورها المتعددة والمستحدثة وسبل مكافحتها. في الختام نتوجه بالشكر مرة أخرى لجمعية المحاسبين القانونيين القطرية ومعهد الامتثال العالمي على جهودهم في عقد هذا المؤتمر، ونتمنى التوفيق لجميع المشاركين به والخروج بتوصيات تساهم في دعم وتطوير أدوات مكافحة الجرائم المالية. والسلام عليكم.
فليتفضل السادة أعضاء مجلس إدارة جمعية المحاسبين القانونيين القطرية والسيد ناجي العجي مدير إدارة الجمعيات والمؤسسات الخاصة بوزارة التنمية الاجتماعية والأسرة والسيدة نولا لينان لتكريم الرعاة. القاسمي ممثل عن وزارة البيئة والتغيير المناخي. السيد صالح نوفل ممثل عن بنك قطر الوطني. السيد جودي سيتاهوت الرئيس التنفيذي لبنك الدوحة. السيد محمد الهتمي ممثل عن شركة قطر للإيداع المركزي للأوراق المالية.
Our first speaker is Neil Jeans, and he is a financial crime compliance and risk consultant with over 25 years' experience. He has worked within law enforcement agencies investigating fraud and money laundering. He has been an AML and counter-terrorism financing regulator and also held senior AML roles at global financial institutions around the world, including London and Australia. Neil was appointed by the Australian regulator, AUSTRAC, to be the expert witness in the civil claim against the Commonwealth Bank of Australia and Westpac, and was also the AUSTRAC authorised external auditor for Afterpay. Today he will be discussing global AML initiatives, the FATF and beyond, risk and opportunities in the evolving AML landscape. Neil, welcome.
Anti-money laundering is just over 30 years old. Much has changed in those 30 years, but, however, much stays the same. Whilst the world has moved to implement anti-money laundering standards, we will see much more needs to be done to tackle the use of legitimate businesses by criminals to launder the proceeds of their crimes. The focus, oops, I haven't got my, sorry, I have that, excuse me. In April this year, the FATF published an important document, which is effectively a scorecard on how we are all doing in the fight against money laundering and the implementation of AML-CTF. This report provides some increased focuses and some areas of attention, and the effectiveness of AML-CTF is a key element in that. The fight and the focus on effectiveness creates both risk and opportunities for both the public and the private sector, which we will explore through this presentation. As you can see, effectiveness is being increasingly focused upon. But as we stand to say here today, effectiveness, which has only been an FATF concept since 2003, and was only introduced as part of the fourth round of mutual evaluations, is lagging behind the global implementation of standards. And effectiveness is where really the fight against money laundering and the fight against terrorist financing is focusing upon. Effectiveness is an important area where both the public and private sectors can work together, and ultimately will have a significant impact on the success of AML-CTF regimes globally in the coming decades. As you can see from the current graph, there is a good level of compliance from the standards, the FATF 40 recommendations. But you can see that there's much more work to be done on effectiveness. And that's globally. That's not only in the FATF membership, but also in the regional bodies as well. Today, we are going to focus on three areas in the report, which are important areas for financial institutions and the public sector alike. We're going to look at the assessment of risk. We're going to look at the preventative measures that are contained within the FATF standards. And we're also going to be talking about transparency and beneficial ownership, which is an increasing focus both globally regarding not only anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing, but also tax, CRS and FATCA. Risk assessment is important. It is a foundation of most AML-CTF regimes. Risk-based approach requires that everybody understands the risk. It allows for a proportionate approach to AML-CTF and has the ability to allow financial institutions and others covered by AML-CTF to really address the real risks rather than the hypothetical risks, and ultimately make sure the regime is fit for purpose. As you can see, after the people have raised, or countries have raised their game after the mutual evaluations have occurred. So the scorecard to date is that pre-mutual evaluations, risk assessment needed to improve, but we've seen a significant increase in risk assessment over the last few years. Interestingly enough, from a FATF-styled regional bodies, there is an increased requirement to make sure those risk assessments are effective, with only 19% of FATF regional body assessments continuing to receiving substantial or higher risk ratings. The reason for this may be timing. Most countries only undertook their first round of risk assessments just before the mutual evaluations. So you could argue that risk assessment is not very mature. It's still growing, it's still evolving. But as it's a foundational element of money laundering and anti-money laundering, it's important there's an increased focus in this area. And this creates an opportunity. It creates risk because as you look at risks, as you document risk, as you understand risks, you may find that you've got to move your regime or you've got to adjust your approach. But it also creates an opportunity because it allows you to focus fairly and squarely on those risks. These can be summarized into a number of phrases. The risk assessments need to be current. They need to be up to date. They need to be continue to be remained and accurate. They need to be done in partnership. This is not something that the public sector needs to do for the private sector or the private sector needs to do for the public sector. This is a true partnership between the public and private sectors to understand the risks, because we all have different perspectives on risk. The risk assessment should be as detailed as possible. And that's not only at a national level, but that's at an institutional level as well. It's vitally important that risk is fully understood by the organizations. And those risk assessments should be used widely, both at a national level, but also within an institution. They should be used to make decisions. They should be used to assess whether you want to do business as clients, as we've heard previously. How do we improve? Well, the risk assessments, I think, need to get more comprehensive. They need to be based on data. There's an increasing focus on data. We're in an increasingly data-rich environment, and this is borne out by other speakers today. But there also needs to be a clear methodology, so we all understand how we're assessing risk and how we're quantifying risks. I'm now going to move on to preventative measures. Preventative measures are the FATF requirements that are put in place by, for reporting into financial institutions and those covered by the legislation. The FATF talk about the big six recommendations. 3 of them are focused on criminalization of money laundering, criminalization of terrorist financing, and sanctions around terrorist financing. The other 3 of the big 6 are very much fairly focused on the AML-CTF prevention. They are Recommendation 10, Recommendation 11, and Recommendation 20. Recommendation 10 is customer due diligence, as we can see on the left-hand side. Recommendation 11 is record keeping, having records, transaction activity. And Recommendation 20 is the reporting of suspicious matters, reporting of suspicious transactions to the authorities. However, you can see from this graph there are a number of things that the FATF are focused on which contribute particularly to customer due diligence. Things like the identification of politically exposed people, things like the reliance on third parties, which is particularly important in an environment where you have both financial institutions and designated non-financial businesses and professions working together to identify customers. Obviously, you can also see here that there's a little bit more work that needs to be done on the right-hand side in relation to customer due diligence into relation to designated non-financial businesses and professions. It's true to say that up until recently there's been a heightened focus on financial institutions, banks and securities dealers, etc. And really, it's only recently that the DNFB, the professions, lawyers, accountants, and real estate agents, has come into focus and had a more dedicated focus. And that may contribute to the lack of maturity. We can see this lack of maturity here, where we're looking at banks as being more mature, having good or average risk mitigation, understanding their risks. Whereas from a designated non-financial services perspective, the risks are less understood. So I think that creates an opportunity to understand more about the risks in those sectors. So what should be done? Well, we're looking at the preventative measures. So, I apologise. So we're looking at the preventive measures regarding suspicious matter reporting. You can see that in relation to the DNFPPs, there's less of a focus on reporting. So I think the FATF here is expecting that DNFBs, there should be more focus on reporting for designated non-financial businesses. Also, I think it's highlighting across the sectors, not only designated non-financial businesses, but also in the financial service sectors, that risk is not, that STR reporting is not in line with risk. Maybe we should stop to explore that. Is that because STRs are not being reported? Is that because the organisations concerned don't understand the risks and the vulnerabilities they're facing, and therefore are not able to identify STRs as effectively and efficiently as they may be able to do? The FATF comes up with some good suggestions around preventative measures. The ability to articulate risk and align preventative measures to risk is important. Again, they reinforce the importance of that public-private sector partnership. They also identify that information sharing is vitally important. They also see that this is a whole of industry problem. This is not about singling out one sector. It's the industry working together to make things more difficult for the bad guys. But also they're highlighting that there should be the same level of focus as we've seen on financial institutions up to now being applied to designated non-financial businesses and professions. From an opportunities perspective, where does that leave us? I think raising the bar in preventative measures, making sure that preventative measures are the best they possibly could, but against a background of risk. An increased focus on designated financial businesses. And that's not only in relation to the public sector focus on them, it's also in relation to other parts of the industry focus on them. We're seeing an increasing focus globally on financial institutions looking at the other types of reporting entity or regulated institution they bank and asking, are they creating a risk for them simply because they're banking them? But it should be outcome focused. We should not necessarily be just trying to do compliance for compliance sake. We should be making sure that we actually are making a difference in the space. I want to turn to beneficial ownership and transparency. This is being characterized as a new battleground. But from my experience, it's actually an old battleground that is now being revisited. In my experience, that transparency and beneficial ownership has been a significant problem for many, many years, ever since the FATF has been in position. We're seeing an increased focus, particularly with the results of CRS and FATCA activity, and that's triggering a new focus in this space. And obviously sanctions and the activity in the sanctions space is also focusing on transparency and beneficial ownership. But again, here we see across the board a low level of effectiveness, a reasonable level of compliance, but a low level of effectiveness. And again, I think that's where the FATF will be looking at in the 5th round of mutual evaluations. That is highlighted by some data on basically nominees and nominee arrangements. As you can see, both in the FATF countries and also other countries, there is an increasing focus in that space. But there is more work to be done. Yeah. And the FATF then provides us some helpful eyes in good practice, which is all around making sure things are more transparent, developing registers, having information about beneficial ownership, obviously with considerations of privacy and confidentiality, but having information available to those people that need it in order to be able to understand the risks that a particular customer poses. So we're now circling right the way back to customer due diligence, as we've mentioned previously. And that also is highlighted by the opportunities. These are heavily focused on customer due diligence, making sure that the information is available to everybody. So that's the report card from the FATF. With the few minutes I've got left to me, I'll talk about what's moving forward. Emerging priorities, the real estate sector. In July this year, the FATF published their real estate sector. The real estate sector is being seen as an increasingly important sector for many countries. As you can see, 56% of countries say real estate is important to them as a sector. However, only 3% of countries truly understand the risk in that sector. And 53% believe the risk is high or medium to high. The question I think I will pose to the audience, I'm not expecting an answer, but the question I will pose to the audience is, how are you managing and identifying and managing that risk, both as a country, but also as individual businesses within the regulated sector? Moving forward, Singapore have recently been given the presidency of the FATF, and they've clearly set out some priorities. They will be the president of the FATF from July this year to July 2024. Focus on effective. I don't think there's any surprise there from us. Focus on raising the bar, not only with the FATF membership, and I come from a country, Australia, which is an FATF member, which is significantly still non-compliant with the FATF standards. That's something that we're pushing very hard for in our country. But they will also be focusing on the regional bodies as well. This is making sure that everybody is playing by the same rules and doing it the best they possibly can. But they're also signaling what the next round of mutual evaluations are going to be looking at. They're going to be tightening them up. There's going to be a shorter cycle. There's going to be more emphasis on risk. There's going to be more focus on results-orientated activity. And, as announced in July this year, the 5th round is going to be heavily focused on designated non-financial businesses and professions. So, in summary, there's a lot happening, there's a lot to be proud of, but there's also a lot of work to be done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Neil. We'll hear from our other speakers first, and then there'll be time for questions after the end of this morning's session. So our next presenter is Marcina Hunter. She's a senior analyst and thematic lead on extractives and illicit financial flows at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. Her focus is on gold-related crime and other illicit financial flows. Marcina has travelled with me from the beautiful Sunshine Coast in Australia today, and her presentation is titled Illicit Gold Flow, How the Gold Trade Can Be Used to Evade Sanctions. Marcina, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
I'm Marcina Hunter, and I'm a senior analyst with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. We're an NGO based in Switzerland that covers a wide variety of organized crime and illicit activity. I myself focus on extractives-related crime, especially gold, as well as other types of financial flows. My colleague Neil here set me up very well today, talking about designated non-financial entities and how they will be a focus for the next FATF evaluation. And part of one group of actors that falls into that is precious metal dealers and the gold trade. And we are seeing a lot of movement around this with DNFBPs, politically exposed persons, and beneficial ownership. And this is certainly very relevant and high risk within the gold sector, not just in relation to the evasion of sanctions, but illicit flows in general. But today I will be focusing on how illicit gold flows can be used to evade sanctions. While sanctions impacting on the gold sector have been around for quite a while, many years, the new wave of sanctions on Russia have significantly increased the imperative to understand sanctions, their impacts, and what it means for financial entities and other precious metal dealers. There's three types of sanctions. There are comprehensive sanctions, which cover an entire country, sectoral sanctions, which target a specific sector, and there's targeted sanctions, which target specific individuals or entities. What we're seeing with the sanctions on Russia is that they're sectoral, and that there are sanctions on gold, the gold trade, by many countries, and they're also targeting specific individuals or companies that are linked to the gold trade. But this is not the first time the gold trade has been targeted. We've also seen targeted sanctions on Sudan and Venezuela, which have also impacted the gold trade in recent years. And also looking at the purpose or motivation behind sanctions, they can be either to signal a country that you disapprove of their action and use it as a bargaining tool going forward, to constrain their action, and this is more sanctions aimed at weaponry or other types of goods. Gold could possibly fall in this, in that you're trying to constrain their use of financial vehicles and to access foreign exchange or forex outside of the country. And the final one is to coerce the country or to push them into cooperation. So with the current rounds of sanctions we're seeing, I think they would fall much more heavily into signaling and a little bit into constraining action. So recent sanctions on Russia impacting the gold trade is the United States, US, United Kingdom, UK, Japan, Australia, Canada, and the EU have all announced bans on Russian gold. In June, the US banned Russian gold imports, which built on previous action, which also impacted the gold trade. In July, the UK prohibited the import of gold from Russia, including prohibiting the acquisition, supply, and delivery, provision of technical assistance, financial services and funds, and brokering services related to gold. Also in July, the EU adopted a package of sanctions, including a ban on buying, importing, or transporting gold and gold products from Russia, and any services in connection with Russian gold. And in August, Switzerland banned the import of Russian gold and gold exports. These are really significant because these are major gold trading hubs globally. In 2020, the UK was the biggest destination for Russian gold, with Russia exporting $16.9 billion worth of gold from Russia to the UK. So with that flow cutting off, Russia is still producing gold. It's just looking for other places for that gold to go. And that's what we can dive more into later today. Also, the recent ban by Switzerland is notable because Switzerland previously had restricted gold, but Switzerland has had a significant increase in gold imports, in particular from Dubai recently. And also from Russia, there was gold imports from Russia, although Switzerland's major refineries say that they are no longer sourcing that gold. So it's a bit of a mystery where that gold is coming from. Highlighting again the weaknesses in the regulatory and reporting systems around gold flows and how they need to be strengthened. So while the UK has brought in sanctions in July, Russian gold has effectively been banned from entering the UK since March. The UK brought in sanctions barring dealing with money market instruments, which gold is defined as a money market instrument or financial vehicle. And so it essentially fell under that umbrella. Also, the London Bullion Market Association, or LBMA, good delivery rules ban gold that violates any EU, US, UK, or any other relevant economic and trade sanctions lists. And the LBMA suspended all Russian refineries from its accredited lists. And so as such, Russian gold has been de facto barred from entering the UK since March. All of this is to say that gold flows from Russia are not necessarily illicit, but gold entering into those major financial hubs, there are major barriers to entry. And so being cut off from those markets, there's really significant motivation or imperative to hide the origin of that gold or the beneficial owners of where that gold is coming from. And so I'd also like to talk a bit about secondary sanctions now. So secondary sanctions are economic restrictions imposed on third parties that transact with sanctioned entities. So what this means is that, for example, the US may not have direct control over a sanctioned entity, a person or business, but they may do business with a business doing business with that person, if that makes sense. So anyway, what they can do is they can have penalties or fines against that person for doing business with that sanctioned person. Why the US has a unique power in this is the dominance of the US dollar globally. And so any one transaction in US dollars with an entity sanctioned by the US is vulnerable to fines or other action by the US. And US prosecutors and regulators can apply significant pressure on banks and other entities that may do business with any actors subject to US sanctions. And so that's why US sanctions in relation to the gold trade become really important to understand and know what your risks are. And so what we've seen since March is that a number of banks globally, including in China, India, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, have actually restricted their business with Russian entities over concerns of violating secondary sanctions. For example, one UAE bank in Dubai, which has previously agreed to pay $100 million in penalties to resolve a US probe into sanctions violations related to Sudan, stopped lending to Russian banks. So this was really notable because this was one of the first UAE banks to take this step. And so again, this is where criminal networks step in, is that it provides the services to various actors who are trying to evade these sanctions and access international trade hubs, foreign exchange in US dollars, euros, pounds, to enable them to transact in international financial systems. So why gold? Gold is very attractive to criminal networks for a variety of reasons. The first is global liquidity. Gold can be used as a currency in nearly every single country in the world. So it's a really adaptable financial vehicle that can be used anywhere. The second is anonymity. The regulation of the gold sector and precious minerals is a lot less stringent or effective than what we see with other types of financial institutions and bank accounts and that sort of thing. And so it makes it really attractive for that reason, as well as it's impossible to trace the origins of gold. Once gold is melted down in a smelter, refinery, or even before that, you have no idea where gold came from. And this is important too because you don't know whether it's freshly mined gold or it's recycled gold that has already existed. And you can really easily disguise the origins of gold For example, by mixing it with some other types of metals to give it the consistency of jewelry rather than pure doré or freshly mined gold. And so it's very easy to launder. And one of the last reasons is that it's also easily moved. It has a very high volume to value ratio. This is a picture of $1 billion worth of gold, illustrating that. So it's very heavy, but small in volume. And so it's very easy to move. So this was the price in March, but just to give you an idea of how much, what it would take to move $1 billion worth of gold, it would be 21 flights on a small plane, 312 trips by a mule, and this would be a person carrying gold in hand luggage or cargo on a flight and moving about 50 kilos of gold at a time, or 6 truck trips using a 20-foot truck. And again, the limitation there is weight, not volume. So, but as you can see, it's very easy to move $1 billion across borders. And with Russia in particular, since 2014, Russia and Moscow have been working to make its economy more resilient to sanctions. And this has been diversifying its economy and its reserves away from the US dollar. And so after more than doubling its gold reserves in March 2022, Russia had an estimated $130 billion worth of gold. And after invading Ukraine, Russia lost access to an estimated 60% of its foreign exchange reserves, leaving it with the $130 billion worth of gold and some other miscellaneous assets. And so gold became a really important way for Russia to protect itself. And since that time, we have seen other countries increasing their gold stockpiles, including China and Turkey and some other countries. And so I think this is a trend that we'll continue to see. So how does gold move? So globally, there are some major international gold trading hubs that are used to move gold through illicit supply chains, not just to evade sanctions. But these include Dubai and the UAE, which is a major hub. Turkey has been involved in sanctions evasions in the past. China is relevant for Russian sanctions. And we also have India, has major gold markets. China and India are two of the biggest gold consumers in the world, and so their consumer markets can be really important for this. So looking at ways gold has been used to evade sanctions, I'll just use the example of gas for gold with Turkey and Iran. So when there was US sanctions on Iran, and this, during the height of this operation, it was 2012 to 2013, what would happen is that Turkey would purchase Iranian natural gas with Turkish lira. This lira would be used in Turkey to buy gold by Iranian gold buyers. And then that gold would either be moved back to Iran or moved to the UAE. And in the UAE, that gold would be sold for foreign exchange, such as US dollars or euros. And that foreign exchange could then be moved to Iran. And this supported Iran's dwindling foreign exchange reserves. And under a loophole at the time, this was legal as long as the payments were not made to the government of Iran, which was likely happening in practice. So this loophole has been plugged since then, and it's something governments are aware of and will likely be looking for going forward. At the height of this, Turkey exported $15 billion in gold, including $5.3 billion to Iran and $7.9 billion to the UAE. Venezuela has also been the target of waves of US sanctions, as well as UK and EU sanctions. And in 2019, the US blacklisted the Central Bank of Venezuela, almost completely isolating the Venezuelan financial system from the world. Subsequently, it is suspected that Russia supported Venezuela in using planes to move tons of Venezuelan gold to various foreign markets to evade sanctions. This includes Uganda, Turkey, and the UAE. The gold was exchanged for foreign exchange, including US dollars and euros, which was then returned to Venezuela. So this is a common scheme that we see with gold being used in various ways. Probably the major location right now that we're seeing with illicit gold flows globally is the UAE. It's a dominant player in gold and IFF flows. Since the invasion of Ukraine, there have been reports of Russia and Russians and their assets flocking to Dubai, including trips by private aircrafts suspected of moving private property. While there are very legitimate reasons for Russians to be moving their property in this way, it also creates significant vulnerabilities and opportunities for individuals looking to evade sanctions or engage in other types of illicit flows. In the 2020 mutual evaluation by the Financial Action Task Force found weaknesses in the UA regulation of the gold trade, and so this is a major point that has been identified previously, as Neil mentioned, and one that needs to be addressed going forward. And I mentioned this before, but in March of this year, Switzerland noted a sharp increase of gold from Dubai, which increased to 36 tons of gold worth $2.1 billion. And this was the largest import of the last 6 years. 4 of the Swiss refineries that are members of the LBMA said that they have not imported gold from Dubai since March, seeing this as a major risk. And so observers and NGOs observing this think that there's a high risk that Russian gold is moving through Dubai to Switzerland, or other flows are moving that way. But it was a bit of a mystery who this gold belonged to or where it's coming from. And I expect the recent Swiss move in August is an attempt to shut down this loophole. China also comes up as a source of gold. And this isn't necessarily an illicit or illegal way to move gold, but it is a trend that we're seeing in a shift in how gold is moving. Russian gold exports to China have increased since March, and the largest Russian gold miner, is now issuing bonds in Chinese yuan. And so I think that's a shift that we will see going forward. Looking at African vulnerabilities, Africa is a major gold producer and has faced their own sanctions on various countries, including Sudan, as well as having relationships with sanctioned Russian actors, including the Wagner Group. In particular, Sudan has been in the news quite a bit lately. Sudan is a major gold producer exporting billions of dollars worth of gold, and there have been reports of Sudanese officials working with the Russian government and Wagner Group in Sudan to be producing and exporting gold. So this is a risk. We also see Mali as a recent risk. Mali is a major gold producer in West Africa. And in recent years, Guinea has also become a major gold exporter. Guinea is not necessarily involved in any sort of sanctions evasion, but it is a major player in illicit gold flows from the region and is one to watch. And I should also say that seeing a shift, we hear a lot about gold from Africa going to the UAE, but we are starting to hear a shift a little bit more about gold also going to Turkey. And so I think that's a trend to watch in the future as we go forward, especially with Turkey playing a role in also global food flows and that sort of thing. And we see a lot of overlaps with the gold trade and trade-based money laundering. and that sort of thing, where gold profits are used to buy goods in foreign countries such as the UAE, and those are re-imported back into the country of origin. That's a very common type of money laundering we see. So looking at opportunities and resources going forward, I think looking at effectiveness and improving the effectiveness, knowledge is really key. And so reporting on gold and financial flows, highlighting risks and vulnerabilities is important to being able to identify how best to protect yourselves and take action. Also, targeted sanctions and action are really important. Comprehensive sanctions which target whole countries or sectors have actually shown to not only be not as effective, but actually have greater harm and empower criminal networks. And so when we're designing not just sanctions, but also actions by governments and banks, it's important that they be well-informed and targeted so that we're really having the most effective action against the individuals or entities we want to influence, because it can have very negative impacts for vulnerable populations in those source or transit countries that then rely on criminal networks. Another action is support for formalization and regularization of gold supply chains. So I think it's really important that we don't walk away from this saying, oh, well, we need to cut off buying from gold sector or cut off our financial actions with them. It's actually shown that one of the greatest barriers to formalizing the gold sector and making it more secure is access to finance and access to formal markets. And so what would be more effective would be, one of the term I like is lean in due diligence and finding ways to more responsibly engage with the gold sector. I think Qatar is really well positioned for that for various reasons. A last point is educational resources. There are resources available to better understand sanctions, gold flows, and actions that can be taken, including OECD due diligence and actions that can be taken about KYC, know your customer, and designated non-financial entities, including precious metal dealers. And I would also just note is that another overlap we see is money laundering through the real estate sector. We do hear a lot about illicit profits from the gold sector being used in trade-based money laundering, as well as the real estate sector, and casinos, actually. So I would say those are some of the three big overlaps that we see, not necessarily just with sanctions, but illicit gold flows and gold smuggling. So yes, I think with that I will leave it to my colleague Martin to take the floor.
Our final speaker for this morning's session is GCI's chairperson and my esteemed colleague from the UK, Mr. Martin Wood, financial crime consultant. Martin was formerly a Metropolitan Police officer investigating financial crime and has since had a long career in financial crime compliance. Known as the Wachovia whistleblower to many people, he is a leading AML commentator. Martin prides himself as an enemy of the money launderer, the fraudster, and the terrorist, who uses training to equip, inspire, and motivate others. Today, he will be discussing stopping money laundering. It's all about training, competence, and confidence. Welcome.
Thank you, Nola, and thank you, everybody, for sharing your time with us here today. Thank you for the sponsors for supporting this very important event, and we hope that at the end of it, you will take away from this event something that you can use at the coal face of your business, in your firms and your banks. Before I go too quickly into my presentations, congratulations to Qatar on yesterday being your 51st birthday of independence. And look how far as a nation you've come. You're going to host a World Cup, the global game, the beautiful game, the game that connects people and brings us all together. And I think it'll be a wonderful success, and you'll show your country to the world and what a great country it is, and it'll be fabulous for you. A little bit more about me before we dive into my presentation. Neil Jeans and I were police officers together many, many years ago. We were at a little and large show, and we would grab some comedic attention as we walked around London, because Neil actually wanted to be a policeman when he was younger, but there was a time when you weren't allowed to be a policeman in London if you were too small. They changed the height restrictions. Neil joined the police, and we've been very, very good friends ever since. But I refused to go to Australia with him. More to the point, my wife refused to let me to go to Australia and join him. So, ladies and gents, we are members of the global anti-money laundering community. We stand against the money launderers, the fraudsters, the terrorist finances, the corrupt people. We try to stop the harm they cause, because the lifeblood of their business is money. And that's what we handle. And that's what we seek to filter out. We don't want to handle dirty money. But whilst we are anti, and immediately it presents this confrontational piece, and many of us who work in the business of compliance, we're accustomed on a daily basis to confrontational conversations. I'd prefer this presentation to be much more positive. What we achieve and what we do together, and how we can stop the bad guys. It's a progress we have made, progress we can make. And for that emphasis, I really like training. Earlier on, people this morning talked about technology, artificial intelligence. It's no good, ladies and gentlemen, without real intelligence, your experience, your expertise. If the AI is not designed people who understand the business, know what they're doing, you will not generate the best outcome. Do not let artificial intelligence replace you. Work alongside it. Make sure it complements you. But what you have done in all your time as compliance officers, as regulators, even law enforcement officials, is very, very important and contributes significantly to a potential positive outcome in regard to using technology to defeat the bad guys. So the World Cup is coming. We are equally, as I say to you, a team, but our opposition is the bad guys. But the successful team in the World Cup will know its opposition. The manager will have a strategy. In your firms, you need a strategy to win. And as well as many KYs, KYC, KYB, there is a KYO to be successful in this business. Know your opposition. The winning team in the World Cup final will win in part because they know their opposition, their strengths and their weaknesses. Money launderers are limited by two primary single factors. Their imagination. As we've heard, you can launder money through many, many assets, through many, many things: gold, real estate, oil, cash. And the other thing that limits them is our collective endeavour to stop them. They're the only two primary things that limit money launderers. What we do rarely matters. And if I may quote a friend of mine, Jeffrey Robinson, from New York, who wrote The Laundrymen, always remember this: dirty money is like water. It seeks the course of least resistance. We have a job, ladies and gentlemen, to put some resistance in our processes to stop the money launderers. By the way, if you're taking photos, I assure you we will be sharing these presentations either through this event or they will be on the GCI's website, and you can access those presentations afterwards. You'll see mine are not very word heavy. They are prompts to actually make sure we talk about the right subject matter and we bring it to your attention. So football unites us, brings us together. Have I gone too far forward here? That's one you put in, is it? Yeah, I've gone too far forward. Go back to that one. Football does unite us, it brings us together. There's a common language in football, there are common rules. Similarly, there is a commonality in anti-money laundering. Important to both businesses is integrity, ladies and gents. Football without integrity is broken. It has nothing. We cannot rely upon it. We cannot trust in it. we cannot believe in it, we cannot invest our passion into it. We need to maintain the integrity of financial markets. We stand against dirty money corrupting and polluting our businesses, our communities, our nations. The Russian money has penetrated lots and lots of institutions in America and in the United Kingdom. Many years ago, Vladimir Putin determined it was time to throw away the Trilby hat and the gabardine mac, the uniform of the spy. And he determined the way ahead was to corrupt the money, which he has successfully done. And therefore we don't properly trust our institutions in America and the United Kingdom. I once interviewed a friend of mine, Bill Browder, a sworn enemy of Vladimir Putin, author of 2 books, Red Notice and Freezing Order, the latest one, Freezing Order. And I said to Bill, why did the National Rifle Association give Donald Trump $25 million to his election campaign? And do you know what his answer was? He said, Martin, the Russian government gave the National Rifle Association $25 million. That's where we are, ladies and gentlemen. Money is corrupting other institutions, and we stand against it. That's what we do. There are rules in football, there are rules in money. We're increasingly connected. Football's bringing us all together in Qatar, but we're connected by our mobile telephones, by computers, by transport, by technology. But the same technology is exploited by criminals. So let me take you back many years ago for when Neil Jeans and I were police officers. I joined the police in 1983. At that time, a common crime was armed robbery. People entered the banks wearing a mask, not because of COVID-19, it was to hide their identity. And they were carrying a gun. And they threatened people and they stole the money. And upon leaving the bank, they got into a stolen car. It's all about fast getaway and hiding their identity. They'd often abandon the first stolen car, which everybody saw them leaving the bank in, and get into another stolen car, which they hoped nobody saw them getting into. Nowadays, nobody commits armed robbery in London or upon banks. They may rob other drug dealers, but they don't rob the banks. The criminals have learned there is far more money to be stolen with your fingers on a keyboard of a computer than the finger on the trigger of a gun. It's very simple. I hope this works. Just at the click of a button. That's how you steal the money. And so we have the FATF that puts rules across the globe because money laundering, like football, is a global business. Anti-money laundering is equally a global business. The job of the money launderer is to move the money away from the scene of the crime as quickly as possible. And I'll reference this again in my presentation, but let me reference it now, lest I do forget. Commonly, our transaction monitoring models have looked at value, volume, and frequency to identify the unusual transaction that may be indicative of something suspicious. We miss something. We fail to see something. I'm not a money launderer, and neither are you. The benchmark in all you do is your account. Most of us in this room will receive one primary credit a month into our account. That comes from our employer. From that credit, we pay out our bills. In the UK, we pay a huge amount of money for our energy. Welcome to Little Britain, post-Brexit. We pay our mortgages. We pay for healthcare. We pay bills. But we don't do it necessarily quickly. We're structured. My account is calm. The difference between me and the money laundering bank account is velocity. That's what we've missed. We've missed velocity and speed. My job, ladies and gentlemen, as a trainer, is to think like a money launderer. That's how I catch a money launderer. Stolen money, dirty money, is on the move constantly. It's trying to outrun law enforcement and outpace them, which is why, time and time again, we see the credit come into the bank account, commonly in the UK now, stolen funds from another bank account. We are suffering an epidemic of fraud. It is out of control. People are losing their pensions, they're having money stolen from their bank accounts. It is only possible to do that because the criminals have a getaway car waiting to take them away from the scene of the crime. The scene of the crime is the victim's bank account. And the getaway car in 2022 is the money laundering bank account, the primary account. And the way you can identify the problems is it moves fast. As soon as it hits my account, I nearly call myself a money launderer. As soon as it hits the money launderer's account, it moves. All of it or most of it. But that doesn't happen in our accounts. If it does, it's very, very seldom, very, very rare. So how do you stop it? Most transaction monitoring systems are post-event. It happened. The money's gone. Look at your terms and conditions of business, and notwithstanding faster payments, do they give you 24 hours? If they don't, ask yourself another question. Do you want to offer that to your customers? In the United Kingdom now, it's common practice for most of the major high street banks, physical present banks, to block debits above a value of £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 to new payees in order to establish, is this potentially a fraud? The bank is seeking to protect its customer and ultimately seeking to protect itself and its shareholders. The bank is thinking smarter. But it's undone if there are other banks who've allowed the criminals to create accounts using stolen identity and park their getaway car in another bank. We need to think smarter. If the piece you're missing in your transaction monitoring, the training education you're missing in that piece is velocity, and you can stop it. In the rules here, with the lists, if you're offside, if you foul, you get a red card, you will be sent off and you'll be suspended from the game. It might cost your country the World Cup. With the FATF, if you're not implementing the recommendations that everybody else is, you're a weakness in the system. You're a weakness in the supply chain of confidence and competence. And you will be on the list, the grey list. What that means for you is it will cost more money to move money. It will cost more money to rebuild your reputation. Being on the list is a bad thing. Breaking the rules is a bad thing. As compliance professionals, we actually are there. And if you look at the way technology's entered football with VAR, it helps, but ultimately, it's still the human being who makes that decision. Technology helps, but we, the human beings, we are most importantly the people stopping money laundering. Supply chains. Importantly in the supply chains is the supply chain of risk. Neil Jeans referenced it earlier. Banks are now looking, the big banks are now looking at smaller banks saying, what are your controls? Can I have confidence in those controls? Training is important because it helps you to supply confidence to other parties in your supply chain. It is imperative to help you to do that. In the football context, the midfield players supply the ball to the attackers who score goals. Primarily, we're defenders. We try to stop the money launderers scoring goals. However, if we pass good intelligence to the authorities, we can help them score a goal and defeat the money launderers, which is what the whole basis of the FATF is built upon. It's to deter, to stop the money launderers, because there's too much friction and resistance in our processes for them to launder their dirty money in our organisations, in our countries. To detect your transaction monitoring, and don't forget the velocity, and try to be more real time. Try to buy time, because the money launderer is in his getaway car moving fast. We have to slow them down, to put some speed bumps in the process, to even put limiters on there. We're all moving towards electric cars. It's coming, needs to save the world for our children and our grandchildren. They'll have speed limiters upon them. It's not a case of we can't. We can. We control that, just as you control AML in your banks. We are in charge. And for all of we do and everything we look at and lessons we try to learn, sometimes we need to look outside of financial services, outside of accounting, outside of banking, and find lessons somewhere else. And the best lessons you'll ever find in the world of AML and KYC are at the airport. Airlines and airports are pretty good at KYC. We're all going to get screened. They're going to say to you, did you pack your bag yourself? Try saying no. See how far it gets you. Is it your bag? Try saying it belongs to a British Virgin Islands company. See if it gets on the plane. But we in banking tolerate some of this nonsense. Imagine we swapped our jobs and we put some of the people in some of the banks at the airport and said, you're in charge of KYC at the airport. I fly out tomorrow, I'll probably get to the airport 2.5 hours before I fly out. If some of the banking staff are in charge of it, I'd have to get there 2.5 days before we fly out because our systems are broken. We don't manage it properly. We will go away and say, oh, it's a BVI company. Let me go and find out who owns that for you. When did it become my job to understand who owns your company? BVI, does it stand for the British Virgin Islands or beneficiaries virtually invisible? Your choice. But the other great thing about the airport is, and it's a great example to us of why we can take control and demand compliance in our banks, notwithstanding inconvenience. When I fly out tomorrow, I'll be purely hand luggage, and I'll have a bag 20 centimetres by 20 centimetres that must seal at the top, and the maximum liquid I can take is 100 millilitres. When I wrote this piece many months ago, I put 50 millilitres in it, and my editor, Nola, saved me. It's inconvenient, right? It's difficult, but we all tolerate it and we all accept it. And on part of our training and education, the piece we miss with our customers is we don't bring them on the journey. At the airport, they may say to me, if you leave your bag unattended, it may be destroyed or damaged by the security services. I personally have never seen the security services destroy or damage a bag. What I have seen is everybody looking after their bag. Moreover, everybody's looking around the airport for that lonely bag, the bag without an owner. Effectively, the airports recruit us all as deputies to help them, to help us. Because again, importantly, what we do in compliance is we protect. We protect communities, customers, shareholders. And everything they do at the airport is about not inconvenience, that comes part of it, but it's to protect you. Imagine being sat on a plane where they didn't search your bag, where they didn't mind how much liquid you brought on board. How comfortable are you? Would you fly to Disney with your wife and 2 kids, or your husband and being diverse and family on such an airline? What risks in the risk supply chain are they bringing to you? So remember that bag, ladies and gentlemen. When people in your organisation say you can't do that because it inconveniences customers, we can inconvenience customers to protect customers. We can take charge, we can take control, and we can educate our managers as well as our customers. Otherwise, what happens is the airport searches you, you're screened, and you're about to get on the plane, and the plane stops you, says we've got to search you all over again because we don't trust each other, we don't work well together. That's a very important lesson from the airline industry. The airports work with the airlines and the regulators and the customers. We need to look at that collaboration and draw upon it and improve the way we do it. The team. We're all in it together. We support law enforcement. The regulator is on our side. Our common enemy is the money launderer. In football context, I have attackers and midfielders. Our victory is, we don't really score a victory. Our victory is the money launderers not winning. But we have to often, sometimes we block the money, sometimes we block the account, sometimes we give the information to law enforcement, deter, detect, report, and they can become effective. We know what our place is. But to achieve all that, we have a strategy. And I commonly ask this of firms and even national countries, what actually is your anti-money laundering strategy? In too many firms, it's to comply with regulations, which won't always be the most effective, back to this word effective, strategy to stop the money laundering. Whereas on the other hand, if you have an effective anti-money laundering strategy, I believe you will be compliant with the regulations if we think about it like that. And remember, within this team, think like a money launderer. Think about how your team is going to try and attack you and counter it. That's how the winning team will win the World Cup. Not just on how they play, but it's how they stop the other team playing. And it's all about this. It's all about training. So the only footballers going to the World Cup are the ones who've trained hard, play hard, and are fit. None of the old players are going because they're not fit enough anymore. They can't train to the right standards. The winning team in the World Cup will be well trained. The winning team in anti-money laundering is equally well trained. We need to put a cog and we need to put a spoke in the proceeds of crime and stop the wheels turning. That's our job. And I assure you, having done this, it's very satisfying. So the reason I'm known as a Wachovia whistleblower, when I worked for Wachovia Bank, it was the 5th biggest bank in America at the time. It's now part of Wells Fargo. It wasn't big internationally. Every non-dollar transaction in that bank was cleared in London. Swiss franc, Japanese yen, euro, sterling. US dollars in the US. I discovered lots of transactions were unusual and suspicious, including multiple purchases of Swiss watches through Swiss francs from what was called casas de cambio customers, money service businesses, were being used by the Mexican cartels to launder billions of dollars through Wachovia Bank. Remember earlier I said to you I'm not a money launderer? There are people who think there was no money laundering taking place at Wachovia Bank until Martin Woods turned up. I promise you I'm not a money launderer. It's just with my experience, my expertise, I determined that the accounts were being used to launder money. And because my colleagues had never seen it in such a way, that put me into confrontation with my colleagues. I didn't stand down. I joined the police force to fight bullies. If you want to bully me in a bank, I won't stand down against you. I will stand up to you. So eventually we fell out, and I blew the whistle to the American authorities and the UK authorities, and the bank paid a substantial fine. Now, most whistleblowing stories don't have a happy ending. Somebody has a difficult life. Mine is a very happy ending. My whistleblowing contributes to me being stood here in front of you now, sharing my time with you, having this great privilege to come to your country, because I made it an asset, and I want to come around the world and both motivate and inspire people that when you stop money launderers, it is a very, very satisfying thing. And that's why you need to be well trained to put a spoke and stop the wheels of money laundering turning. I could do some training on how to operate the slides, really. So what do we do in our job? We aim to stop the money laundering, or how do we measure success? It's very difficult, ladies and gents. Very difficult. A great example is the 1MBD case in Goldman Sachs. There were whistleblowers at Goldman Sachs who said these transactions of bond issuance for the Malaysian government, they are wrong. We are charging a public government $600 million for a $5 billion bond issuance that everybody else in the banking street would charge $30 million for. Why are we getting $600 million? It's wrong. At the time, the highest levels of management in Goldman Sachs sanctioned those transactions. They went ahead, and my estimate, I think that those decisions and the penalties and restitutions and the guarantee on the bond has cost Goldman Sachs and its shareholders $7 billion. As compliance officers, if you'd stopped that transaction, how do you say to the management of Goldman Sachs, I've just saved you $7 billion? So our job as compliance officers can be difficult. Nonetheless, I actually don't think compliance officers should be given bonuses. My anxiety and my fear of bonuses is they compromise people. They incentivize others, but they compromise a compliance officer. A compliance officer should never be thinking about how does this decision, how will this conversation or this email impact upon my bonus? Imagine a police officer being asked in the witness box, Detective Constable Woods, what was your bonus last year? And how did you achieve it? Can you now see how a bonus can compromise people who are in a position to make decisions, to manage risk, to protect people, to stop harm, and to have a very big long-term view of the outcome of some transactions? Don't worry, if you're compliance officers, I advocate you should be paid more money. So I want you to get a salary increase, but I don't want you to be paid a bonus. And please, if you think it's very controversial, do discuss it with me over lunch. One of the things I like about these events is I come to learn. Because a man who thinks he's the smartest man in the room, he's in the wrong room. He's not going to learn anything, is he? So I assure you, ladies and gents, I'm not the smartest man in this room today. Knowledge is power. Do you ever sense, though, with the banking experience, that some people in banking that perceive knowledge as contamination? They don't want to know. They want people to be able to prove that they know. Sometimes in firms, I don't put stuff in writing because it doesn't need to be put in writing. But ordinarily, if somebody says to you in a firm, don't put that into writing, that will not be for your benefit. When I was at Wachovia Bank, the most powerful weapon I had, remember I joined the police in 1983? The internet didn't come about until about 2001. This was my most powerful weapon. And I always wrote in my diaries. Everything was written in my diaries. So when I issued legal proceedings against a bank, I had all the notes in the world to draw upon. And of course the bank settled with me because the pen had served me well. And I did put things into writing. So that's very important to us. But in the world, what we need to look at in this world about winning and success, we're going to win if we understand what does our opposition look like. Have you ever given consideration to that? What does a money launderer look like in 2022? What does a fraudster look like in 2022? Before the internet, there was an identity. With the internet and the computer, they can be anywhere they want, anyone they want. There's a whole marketplace out there on the dark web for stolen identity data. As an organization has 37 billion combinations of emails and compromised passwords that they've collected from dark web, criminal forum, chat rooms. In 2022, the money launderer can look like whoever he wants. He's hidden behind a computer screen. So how do you find him? You can find him. He's reflected in his transactions. In a banking context, my name may be Martin Woods, but my bank understands and knows me by my transactions. I'm a set of numbers, an account number, a sort code, and my transactions reflect my character and my personality. You can find money launderers by their transactions. That's how you identify them. And their transactions are unusual, out of context, and they're fast. So to succeed, we need to think about the numbers. How much, how often, but importantly, how quickly. And all of this brings us around to confidence and ability. We cut that T off. We're a can, will, do organisation. We are successful. We drive success. We're educated. We're trained. Importantly, think about training not just your staff, but your customers. Go back to the airport. Bring them on the journey with you. If we are defeatist, we will be defeated. Look at what Qatar has achieved in 51 years. That was not a defeatist mentality. That was success. It's a can, will, do. It's positive. Back to the theme of my presentation. Believe in yourselves. Understand if the airports can stop the terrorists, you can stop the money launderer. Pre-COVID-19, there'd be about 103,000 passenger airline flights would fly around the world every day, and 3.2 million passengers were flying from one place to another. Since 9/11, how many US planes have been successfully attacked by terrorists? That's right, 0. They're pretty good at KYC in the airlines, aren't they? Pretty good at screening, and that's because they have support across everything. You cannot land an American passenger airline at an airport anywhere in the world without approval from the American regulatory authorities. So the airports want the American business, they have the right level of security. It's all about protecting the customer. They can, they will, they do. They're not at all compromised by the fear of upsetting customers. Their primary job is to protect customers. And if that gives you inconvenience, so be it. And it does give us all a lot of inconvenience, but it gives us confidence to travel. Without confidence to travel, there would be no airline industry. So what I say to you, what we do matters, right? And actually, you may have worked out already, but surely, as I go on, you'll work out I'm mad. Okay, so I was a whistleblower. I eulogize about money laundering in a way that perhaps you haven't seen before. It excites me, anti-money laundering. I like to defeat the bad guys, but I'm mad. You are too. You're all mad. Because what you do matters. You make a difference. So take that away with you and say, you really do have to believe in what you're doing. If you believe in that, you will generate better outcomes because you can, you will, and you do. In football, the field of play is restricted by white lines and time. In money laundering and crime and fraud, the field of play is limitless. While football fans will come here in November and December, the money launderers and fraudsters may already be here. Oftentimes they'll arrive for your customers. The social engineering of people to deceive them, to penetrate their accounts, to penetrate your organizations, is a global phenomenon. The mobile phone allows me to be in many places at one time. And nowadays, just think about this. Just how deep is the reservoir of data that sits beneath the surface of my iPhone? What can you learn from me about this? It is a tracking device. It is a holding device. It holds all the data about me. And when criminals penetrate this, they can access my life, my bank accounts. So IT security is very, very important. But because of the mobile phone, because of the internet, because of computers, there are very few limits to the criminal. You know, ladies and gents, I don't read my slides, they prompt, but they're also here to prompt your thinking as well. You know, the FATF is all about effectiveness. And in our effectiveness, you really need to start at your terms and conditions of business with your customer, look at them through an anti-money laundering lens, and if you're finding problems, then surely it starts with the onboarding process and how your customers got in the first place. In the UK, far too many organisations spend far too much money dealing with the problem that they allowed in the first place. The far better expenditure is putting on the right friction, the right filters, and the correct controls at the onboarding process. And remember, your field of play is equally limitless. You too have an imagination. You too can think about new ways to stop the money launderer. We'll have some question time later. I have a very difficult question for Neil Jeans, so please do leave me a bit of time if you haven't got enough questions for us, but obviously you're the delegates, you're here attending, you get first shot. But if you don't, I've got a difficult question for Neil Jeans about that. Where would the game be without a referee? Where would the game be without rules? There would be no World Cup. The referee is important, the regulator is important. Far too often, we gear our programs to meet with the regulator's expectations because we fear regulatory sanction. The fear is wrong. We need to make the money launderer fear us. Fear our defence, fear our controls. we need to understand the role of a regulator. It is key and important, and we're a partner with a regulator. I don't know about Qatar because I've not researched the law, but in the United Kingdom, if I'm head of anti-money laundering for a big bank, the title is called a money laundering reporting officer, I can only fulfill that role if the regulator approves my appointment. Essentially, the regulator approves me as a deputy for the sheriff. I work with them. Our common enemy is not the regulator. Our common enemy is the money launderer. Referees enforce rules to make sure the game flows and the game has integrity. Likewise, regulators have to enforce rules because we're human beings. Good people can do bad things and bad people can do good things. None of us are perfect. Please don't be offended, anybody in the room who thinks they are. We need to better educate and engage our customers to tell them what we do and why we do it, particularly on KYC. We also need them to know we are in charge of the bank and the controls and the firms we work for. We dictate the terms of business, not them. Otherwise, we'll have blood-soaked dollars going through our organisations. Money laundering is not an abstract crime. It connects to suffering, harm, and misery. Right now, as we are in this conference, there are criminals exploiting the misery, devastation, and suffering in Pakistan. They've set up fake websites to collect money that people believe is going to go to help and support people suffering in Pakistan. It's not going to get there because they're stealing it. They can only steal that money because they have a bank account somewhere. Criminals exploit weak people, vulnerabilities, and they exploit suffering. Never think of money laundering as a victimless abstract crime. It is the lifeblood of major criminal activity. It is a significant contributor to suffering, harm, and misery, and we can do a lot to stop that. So when the final whistle blows, the World Cup will be won, and attaching to Marcina's presentation, somebody will receive a big piece of gold and take it home. And well done to them for their success. There's never a final whistle with us. The game never ends, albeit in truth, it's not a game, is it? It's wrong to call our business a game. The confrontation never ends. After all, we're the anti-money laundering community. Accept it, ladies and gents. You're in constant confrontation with money launderers. And sometimes that puts you in confrontation with your relationship managers, because the confrontation is our judgment against their judgment. You're going confrontation against customers. Let me tell you something about money launderers. I've met lots of them. Ian and I met some of them in the police service. Be surprised. I've never met a money launderer who is not a nice person. Notwithstanding this misery and harm they cause, they have to be nice to have you to believe in them, to help you to believe it's clean money. They want to charm you and persuade you. Money laundering is a form of deception, so they are con artists. I remember working at a bank once and saying to a relationship manager, I suspect your client's a money launderer. She said, he's a really nice person. I said, as I said, I suspect your client's a money launderer. And sure enough, it was. So remember that you are in confrontation. Our game never ends. Remember how we operate our business. Remember, go back to your benchmark. You have a normal account. Criminal money laundering accounts are very, very fast. Quick money, blood-soaked money, dirty money. Their imagination, your imagination. The lessons you learn from other businesses, other areas. You need to work a great deal with IT, because that's where the money launderers and the criminals are coming at you nowadays. They're opening accounts for you because they're defeating your onboarding process with stolen data. They're no longer coming through the front door of your bank with a gun. They're sat at home with their fingers on a keyboard. And rather than being able to execute one crime at a time, they can execute multiple crimes at any one time. It never ends, unlike the World Cup. In 2026, the World Cup will be in the United States of America. I'm not trying to spoil your party already, I'm just saying it moves on, it never changes. It will keep going. Education should never end in this space. Money laundering changes, crime changes. I'm of an age where I'm a member of the Retired Detectives Association of the Metropolitan Police. And I hear these crazy old men say, back in our day, this wouldn't have happened, or good old-fashioned policing, this wouldn't have happened. But I missed the point, it's old-fashioned, and it doesn't relate to today's world. We need to be constantly trying to outthink, outmaneuver, and outrun the criminal. It's very difficult, but if we are static with our thinking, we'll be static with our controls, the intelligent systems and technology we will buy will be outdated before it's implemented. I have a piece of advice for you. When you recruit new people from wherever they are, 2 questions you ask them, because it's free consultancy. I'm going to ask Neil Jean similar questions in a moment if you don't ask him. Ask them these 2 questions about training and learning. What is the smartest AML thing you do at your bank right now, or you've ever seen done at another bank? Because you might not be doing it, and you might, wow, it's really good. And you probably recruit them and change your program, and give them the credit for them when you recruit it. But then the second question, what's the most stupid thing you do for AML that you think is a waste of money and time? And if it's something you do, don't be offended. Be smart. Let me leave you with this thought. I've got grey hair. I'm old. When we used to holiday, my dad would carry 2 suitcases from one place to another, in Spain normally. Hot, sweating, dripping, frustrated and irritated. He'd get the cases there. Then some smart young person said, I've got a good idea. Why don't we put some wheels on the suitcase? Initially it was 2, now it's 4, now they have a motor. And the younger generation amongst you say, what, you stupid people used to have no wheels on your suitcases? There are young people out there, ladies and gentlemen, who work with you, for you. It may be one of you yourselves. We need to put the wheels on the anti-money laundering suitcase. There has to be a better, smarter way of doing this to defeat the enemy. So go out there, ask them what they do well, encourage your young people to put the wheels on the AML suitcase. There is no end, just like in the suitcase, no end, but we can achieve a great deal. Have you taken my picture out? Okay, one of my pictures is gone. It was a picture of, it was in the abstract, and a picture of the capsule that was used to rescue the Chilean miners. And I would say to you, where were you on the 13th of October 2010? I was at an airport in America returning to the UK, and I watched people all around me grow in their seats and actually smile, and it was a fabulous celebration of mankind at its very, very best. And those people sat waiting, watching the television at the airport. They were part of that. And your AML teams can be part of that. When we come together to work hard and are innovative, we can achieve so much. On that day, we took a lot of men from death's dark door by innovation, endeavor, commitment, human spirit, passion, belief, a can-do mentality, and look at the outcome. And I encourage all of you to use that slide. We'll share it with them later. How dare you edit me out like that? We'll share it with you. It's a great one to say, let's stop being negative about AML. Let's be very positive and use that as an example of how we can achieve wonderful, wonderful things. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to me. We have time for questions. We'd love to take them from you.
Thank you. First, my question to Mr. Jeans, I believe when did you spoke about, or at least what did I understand, it is important to differentiate between real risk and hypothetical risk, or we have to concentrate on real risks. Per my understanding, when we plan for procedures or exercises to be done to address or to manage those risks, we have to consider all types of risks. So if it is possible to elaborate on the difference between real risk and hypothetical risk. Another question for Mrs. Marcina, I believe. When you spoke about sanctions, in conclusion, what did I understand? Too many sanctions create bigger opportunities to challenge them or to give more opportunities for money laundering. I believe this reminds us of the case when United States government banned alcoholic beverages. At that time, it was a great opportunity for mafia because at the same time, number of mafia gangs increased as well as their size of business. So more sanctions means more opportunity to money laundering, I believe. If, too many rules, again, give too much opportunities to penetrate among them, especially considering there are belief among huge communities that most of these sanctions are not moral, are not fair. So it gives a moral advantage to challenge them. If you can elaborate on this point, if it is clear. Thank you.
I'll go first. Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. When I see in practice, I see a lot of risk assessments based on blue sky thinking, based on what could happen rather than what is actually happening. And that's where you need to use the data within your organization to say, for example, there's a baseline concept that all individuals are low risk. Well, that may not be the case. There's a baseline concept that particular products are more risky. But that depends on how you're using the product or how you're offering the product and how your customers are using the product. So what you've got to do, to use the word that Martin uses, you've got to take your risk assessment out of the abstract into the real world. And that becomes quite difficult because ultimately you've got to keep adjusting, you've got to keep checking, because the organizations here operate in a dynamic environment. The world we live in is a dynamic environment. The business community is a dynamic environment. What our customers want is a dynamic environment. The way that our customers use our products is a dynamic environment. And in order to understand the risks and as they change, you've got to continue to do that. So you've got to have the right resources, the right skills in place to be able to identify as the risk changes. Risk is not set and forget. The risk you had today will not be the risk you had tomorrow. So the key point is to continue to understand the risk and continue to use the data and what your business is telling you about how your risks are changing to enhance that knowledge and make sure that your systems and controls, your policies and procedures, the things you do to make the game more fair, to stop the bad guys, continue to evolve and align to the risks. And I've worked on a lot of cases, particularly in Australia, and the one fundamental common issue that caused Westpac, CBA, and a number of other organizations in different sectors to be regulated against was they didn't understand the risk. An example, CBA was fined 700 million Australian dollars for implementing intelligent deposit machines, where you had an ATM where money comes out. They had a machine where, which looked like an ATM, where money came out, but also money was kept in. They didn't understand the risk of what they'd done as a business development. It was a great idea because it made it more convenient for the customer. They didn't have to stand in long queues in the branches paying cash in. They could do it whenever they wanted to. But because they didn't understand the risk, unlike the other three banks in Australia who said one transaction a day, maximum $5,000, not cleared for 24 hours, and you had to open the machine with one of the bank cards. CBA, you could open the machine with any bank card, up to $20,000 a transaction, unlimited number of transactions, and cleared immediately, literally in nanoseconds, the money was cleared into the bank account. As a money launderer, which bank am I going to use? we identified $177 million worth of drug trafficking money that moved through Australia and out to the world through that process. An indication of when the risk changes. You've got to be alive to that. I'll pass over to Marcina.
Thank you. I think you bring up a good point about, okay. I think you bring up a good point about how sanctions do increase opportunities for criminal networks. Apparently it's just me. So I think this is where sanctions design becomes really important, and how we want sanctions that are tailored and targeted, so that we find that balance for banks and other financial institutions, as well as regulators, between drinking from a fire hose, where you just have everything coming at you, and trying to find that needle in a haystack. So designing our sanction systems and regulations in a way that finds a balance so that it is a policy decision with why do we have sanctions. Are you trying to signal, constrain, or coerce a state actor, or a state, or an individual? And so sanctions, you're trying to find that balance between achieving your policy objectives in a non-military way, using economic means, while at the same time reducing the opportunity for criminal networks and harms for vulnerable populations. And that is a policy and a state decision that needs to be made. And in response, when we do see those risks with criminal networks, we need to understand what those risks are and how best to identify and protect against them as precious metal dealers or banks and otherwise. And what I would say is, yes, not everybody may agree with the sanctions regimes. There's lots of countries that have not brought in sanctions. And we don't need to just talk about Russia. Russia is the major story of the day. But we also have Sudan, Iran, Venezuela, Mali, there's North Korea, there's a number of other sanctions regimes that are currently active. And so regardless of how you feel about that specific sanctions regime, if you want to do business with US dollars and US banks, or the UK and the sterling pound, or the euro, you need to know what their sanction regimes are, no matter how you feel about them. And if you feel strongly enough about it, you can decide to no longer transact in US dollars or euros or US pounds, and that would be your decision. But if you feel that you do want to continue to use US dollars, you need to understand US sanction systems, the risks, and also secondary sanctions and what that could mean for your financial institution or your gold business. Would be my response.
Thank you, Marcina. We're actually running a few minutes late, so we have time for one more question. In which case, if there's no questions, Martin, who's going to win the World Cup?
Well, I don't know the answer. I know you're not going to win it, and I'm not being too self-deprecating, but I don't think it's going to be England. I don't think we're equipped enough. Actually, overall, you might not lift a trophy, but as a nation, you'll win the World Cup, so I'm sure you'll win the hearts of the world, and I wish you well with it.
There's more information in the booth outside if you want to come over during the break and ask any questions about that. So let's take a break now and reconvene around 12:30, I believe, for the next session. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to our speakers.
نشكر السيدة نولا وضيوفها الكرام. والآن نستأذن حضراتكم في تكريم الرعاة والمشاركين في مبادرة التدريب الميدانية الرابعة، والتي نفذتها الجمعية تحت رعاية سعادة السيدة مريم بنت ناصر المسند وزير التنمية الاجتماعية والأسرة. فليتفضل السادة أعضاء مجلس إدارة الجمعية للتكريم. السيدة رنا الحاجري ممثل عن ديوان المحاسبة. جلستنا الثانية مع الدكتورة ريم الأنصاري والأستاذ أحمد ترتير والدكتور إيهاب الصنباطي.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. طبعا أنا جزئيتي اليوم بتكلم فيها باللغة العربية، بس بستهل بالحديث باللغة الإنجليزية وبترجمة. أنا عارفة الترجمة الفورية موجودة، لكن لغرض ما بوصل لكم معلومة. طبعا كلنا نعرف كمحامين كمحاسبين أو محاسبين قانونيين تحديدا time is money. الوقت مال. بالنسبة لي أنا اليوم knowledge is fortune. السبب ما وراء طبعا هذا الكلام، نحن كمحامين متعودين نسرد المعلومات بطريقة معينة. عندنا معلومات كثيرة، لكن المميز يكون طريقة ربط المعلومات. فإن شاء الله أنا في خلال هال20 دقيقة بحاول أستغلها قد ما أقدر إني أمر معلومات هامة، وفي النهاية بتطرق للقانون المعني بمكافحة الجرائم المالية. طبعا أستهل حديثي بأشياء إحنا كمحامين كنا نتابعها كآخر التطورات. آخرها كان مطلع أغسطس بداية شهر 8، كلها تتمحور حول إيش؟ نداءات أو معايير معينة تم التطرق إليها أو تحسينها. ففي أغسطس طبعا كان الحديث يتمحور حول أشياء تطرقوا لها زملائنا في حديثهم في السيشن الأول، اللي هي عن KYC اعرف عميلك، عن UBO Ultimate Beneficial Ownership، عن CDD اللي هي Customer Due Diligence، والEDD اللي هي Enhanced Customer Due Diligence، العناية الواجبة والعناية الواجبة المعززة. طبعا UBO في معلومة بسيطة بس أحب أمررها، أن هذه المصطلح تم تمريره عن طريق FATF، وعرفتها بإيش؟ طبعا ليش أنا أتكلم عنه كمحامية؟ لأنه هام وإحنا شفنا أثره عندنا في المهنة. الألتيميت بنفيشال أونرشيب عرفوه بأي طريقة؟ إنه هو كل الشخص اللي يملك، يعني من مالك البزنس الحقيقي. فعرفتها بطريقتين. الطريقة الأولى يا أن الشخص اللي يملك 25% من أسهم الشركة، أو الشخص اللي له سلطة الإقالة والتعيين. فهذا هو المالك الحقيقي للبزنس. ليش أنا ركزت على هالمعلومة؟ لأن من خلال ممارستنا للمهنة إحنا احتجنا نعرف أصلاً المالك الحقيقي للشركة في العديد من القضايا. طبعاً القاسم المشترك بين هذه المصطلحات اللي احنا قلناها سواء كانت بالعربي أو بالإنجليزي KYC CDD EDD، القاسم المشترك بينهم أن المؤسسات المالية حتى احنا كقانونيين ركزت عليهم بشكل جداً دقيق. جداً دقيق يعني إيش يعني بالضبط؟ جداً دقيق من الناحية التحليلية. فهم حاولوا ياخذون الموجود ويرفعونه لمستوى أعلى. مستوى أعلى بمعنى إيش؟ بمعنى يركزون على الجانب التحليلي. وطبعاً الزملاء الأفاضل تفضلوا مشكورين وتكلموا عن تقنيات كثيرة ودخلونا في الفضاء الإلكتروني. بس في شيء أنا حابة أذكره اليوم وإحنا كمحامين مطلعين عليه وبنستخدمه إن شاء الله في مطلع نوفمبر 2022، اللي هو الإكسيد. ما أدري إذا في القاعة في ناس عندنا مختصين في تقنية المعلومات أو تكنولوجيا المعلومات. طبعاً الإكسيد عبارة عن شنو؟ كله يتزامن مع أشياء إحنا نشوفها حولنا وحوالينا. سمعتوا من فترة عن المايكروسوفت. طبعا أنا أشير إلى المايكروسوفت وهذه الشركات الكبيرة لأن الإكسيد لها خص في هذا الجانب. الإكسيد عبارة عن إيش؟ عبارة عن سحابة إلكترونية. سحابة إلكترونية مميزة نوعا ما لنا إحنا كقانونيين وللمحاسبين القانونيين والأشخاص اللي يعملون في القطاع المالي. هذه سحابة إلكترونية معظم المؤسسات المالية دوليا رايحة في اتجاه تبني هذه التقنية. هذه السحابة تغطي جميع الجرائم المالية، ومفهوم الامتثال في منصة واحدة. ليش؟ احنا في عصر السرعة، ونفس ما قالوا زملاء الأفاضل في الجلسة الأولى everything is in a click of a button، يعني كل شيء بضغطة زر. ففعلا هذا الإكسيد جاء بالتزامن مع هذا التطور اللي احنا نشهده. أشياء ثانية احنا بعد نشهدها كمحامين، التطورات التشريعية اللي هي الكريبتو ريجوليشنز، التشريعات الرقمية المالية. هذه أشياء احنا جالسين نقرأ عنها يوميا ونحاول قد ما نقدر نفهمها، لأن في النهاية ما بقول محاماة مهنة تقليدية، فيها القوانين تقليدية ولكن احنا داخلين على عالم مختلف تماما. شيء آخر بعد من الأشياء اللي احنا مركزين عليها الأمور اللي صارت أثناء كوفيد-19 وما بعد كوفيد-19. في أشياء أنا بتكلم عنها مو ضروري تكون موجودة في دولة قطر، ولكنها موجودة في الدول المجاورة وعالميا. ليش أنا أذكرها؟ لأن طبيعة الجريمة أصلا مش محلية، طبيعة الجريمة دولية. شيء اسمه التريبل بي، بس لما أنا أقول التريبل بي ما أقصد الشراكة بين القطاع والعام والخاص، أنا أقصد شيء واحد اللي هو الباي تشيك بروتكشن بروجرام. هذا المفهوم متى طلع؟ أنا بشرحه باللغة العربية بشكل بسيط. طلع أثناء أزمة كوفيد-19. احنا عندنا في الدولة يمكن ما نفهمه، لأن احنا كانت الاستجابة لهذه الجائحة بطريقة مختلفة تماما. بس في الدول الأجنبية كانت استجابتهم في أن معظم الشركات كانت تطلع وتاخذ إيش؟ مثل قروض. فكانت هذه بيئة خصبة فيرتايل جراوند، وايد خصبة لإيش؟ لتبلور جرائم الفساد، تحديدا بين قوسين جرائم مالية، منها كانت غسل الأموال. في بعد شيء آخر جدا مهم في البعد الدولي يضم التخصصين المالي والقانوني، اللي هو نظام الآيزو 20022، اللي هو عبارة عن إيش؟ طبعا بعد بشرحه باللغة العربية البسيطة. معيار دولي، هو عبارة عن معيار دولي لتبادل المعلومات بين المؤسسات المالية باستعمال نفس البيانات. طبعا في الناس المختصين في التكنولوجيا هو يعتمد على الميتا داتا. طبعا هو عبارة عن رسائل لغة المؤسسات المالية تفهمها بينها وبين بعض. إيش أثره بيكون على السوق المالي وحتى إحنا كممارسين؟ السوق المالي بيكون فيه سرعة الدفع، سهولة آليات الدفع، تقليل تكاليف الامتثال، بما أن احنا نتكلم عن الامتثال اليوم الكومبلاينس، وأخيرا يساعد المعلومات أن هي تحط يدها على الجريمة نفسها. ليش؟ لأن اللغة بتكون مشتركة، ففي ما بيكون في جانب كبير للشك ما إذا كان هذا الفعل أو هذه المعلومة تشكل جريمة في النهاية. طبعا هذه كانت بداية، يعني استهلينا حديثنا بهذه الأشياء، الوسائل والأساليب والنداءات اللي حاليا احنا نعيشها وندرسها ونتعايش معاها. طبعا كلها تواترت في فترات متتالية. ليش أنا اخترت هذا الشيء بداية، أبتدي يعني كلمتي بهذا الشيء؟ الجواب له أكثر من شكل، لكن أنا أختار اليوم بصفتي يعني كممارسة كقانونية محامية، أختار شكل واحد اللي هو أدى إلى تزايد هذه النداءات وهذه الممارسات وهذه التطورات عموما، يعني اللي هو شنو؟ هو الجواب العام انتشار الجرائم المالية، بس احنا نختار نوع واحد اليوم اللي هي شنو؟ جريمة غسل الأموال. غسل الأموال لو كانت بدايتها رشوة، لو كانت بدايتها احتيال، أيا كان، إلا ما بتمر في مرحلة من مراحل أو صورة من صور جريمة غسل الأموال. طبعا هذا السبب الأول، سبب اختيار جريمة غسل الأموال. السبب الثاني أن هذه الجريمة يعني بلغتنا البسيطة ممكن تصير في البر، البحر، الجو، والحين تطورنا في الفضاء الإلكتروني بعد. فهي صارت شيء واسع سريع الانتشار صعب السيطرة عليه. طبعا جريمة غسل الأموال وإن صح القول هي طبعا جريمة عريقة، وحتى القوانين اللي تعالجها أو يعني تتصدى لها بعد عريقة. بس من وجهة نظري الشخصية، بحكم أن أنا درست هذا الشيء ومارسته، أنا أشوفها عريقة ولكنها شابة في نفس الوقت. يعني هي جريمة شابة. ليش؟ لأن بغض النظر عن المعلومات الموجودة، عن الممارسات الموجودة، والزملاء الأفاضل تفضلوا مشكورين ويعني عملوا لنا كثير أشياء مشابهات ومقارنات، إن في المطار، السود كيس وما إلى ذلك، لا زالت إلى الآن، لا زلنا إلى 2022 لها صور مختلفة. عشان شيء أنا أشوفها جريمة شابة، يعني تتطبع وتتصور بأشكال قد نعلمها وقد لا نعلمها. لذلك يعني أنا من الجميل، طبعا إذا بنتكلم عن الشق القانوني اليوم، اللي هو نتطرق حق القانون المعني اللي ينظم جريمة غسل الأموال. طبعا هذا لا يعني أن لا توجد قوانين أخرى معنية بالجرائم المالية، لا، عندنا قوانين في قطر. طبعا القانون الأساسي اللي هو إيش؟ قانون العقوبات. قانون العقوبات يتطرق إلى جرائم مالية كثيرة، مثل هي يعني تقع تحت مسمى إيش؟ الجرائم المضرة بالمال العام، يعني تمس المال العام. لكن لما نتكلم عن جريمة غسل الأموال هي مميزة نوعا ما، لها قانون قائم الحالة اللي هو قانون تم تعديله مؤخرا 2019. طبعا احنا نستذكر أيام البحث وهذه الأشياء بديناها من 2010، لأن كان القانون الأول الصادر يعني المتبلور رقم 4 لسنة 2010. بس حاليا صرنا يعني نركز أكثر قانون 20 لسنة 2019. طبعا القانون جدا كبير، القانون فيه 94 مادة، بس أنا اليوم بحط يعني ودي أعمل إضاءات على أشياء جدا هامة ذكروها الزملاء الأفاضل في الجلسة الأولى، وركزوا على قطاع العقارات. هي مجرد يعني الناس المختصين يعرفون هي مجرد تذكرة، بس حلو الواحد يذكرها يبين القانون القطري فعلا ما نساها وتطرق لها. طبعا الإضاءات هي من مواد مختلفة، مش مرتبة، من مواد مختلفة من القانون. الإضاءة الأولى كانوا يتكلمون الزملاء عن المهن، الأعمال والمهن الغير مالية المحددة. من هذا المدخل احنا بنتطرق حق أشياء حق العقارات تحديدا، لأنهم ذكروا العقارات، سوق العقارات. طبعا احنا لما نتكلم عن موضوع الأعمال والمهن الغير مالية المحددة، القانون جدا واضح، يقصد فيها تقريبا 5 أشياء معينة، وفي منهم واحد نهاية مفتوحة تعتبر. كان يقصد الوسطاء العقاريين، كان يقصد تجار المعدات الثمينة والأحجار الكريمة، الموثقون المفوضون، ومنهم أنا كمحامية، منهم المحاسبون القانونيون، ومنهم المحاسبون، الصناديق الائتمانية والشركات، أي عمل أو أي مهنة يصدر بصددها يعني قرار من مجلس الوزراء، وهذه هي النهاية المفتوحة. فلما احنا نتكلم عن القانون القطري مواكب، نعم مواكب، والدليل في مادة جدا بسيطة في مستهل القانون أو مطلع القانون، اللي هي تعريف الأعمال والمهن الغير مالية المحددة. الموضوع الثاني اللي شدني وهو يقع يعني في لب اختصاصي، اللي هو موضوع التحري المالي الموازي. طبعا احنا كممارسين المهنة نعرف ان التحقيق، لما نتكلم عن التحقيق وسلطة التحقيق، هي احنا نتكلم عن جهة معينة وشلون يمارسون التحقيقات. بس لاحظوا شلون القانون تطرق الى ايش؟ موضوع التحقيق او التحري المالي الموازي، بمعنى ايش؟ انه يكون في تحقيق قائم، ولكن في تحقيق اخر موازي له. ليش؟ نوع الجريمة جدا معقدة، فتحتاج هذه الاشياء، يعني تحتاج هذا النوع من التحري الدقيق. طبعا هذه النوع من التحريات ليش؟ الاعداد الادله، تحديد نطاق الجريمه، لان من الصبح احنا نتكلم عن جريمه غسل الاموال، قد تبدا من دوله قطر، قد تنتهي في دوله اخرى، او العكس، تجينا من دول اخرى. الزملاء تطرقوا الى كاس العالم والى صور كثيره، طبعا انا عندي اجوبه كثيره، بس لو ايش الصور اللي ممكن تتبلور عندنا في كاس العالم؟ في صور كثيره، هل هي ضروري تكون موجوده؟ لا، بس هل ممكن تكون موجوده؟ نعم. مثل الامبش ماركتينج، يعني هي باللغه الانجليزيه امبش معناته كمين، ماركتينج تسويق، يعني من خلال الواحد، هي ايفنت ناس ما يقولون مميزه جدا، تحتاج بتفعل الميديا والتسويق. فممكن من الاشياء اجابه على السؤال اللي تم طرحه يعني في الجلسه الاولى، ممكن هذه صوره تتبلور، هل بالضروره تكون موجوده؟ لا، بس هل ممكن؟ نعم. موضوع اخر تطرق للقانون اللي هو التحقيقات الخاصه، احنا الحين نتكلم قانون جدا عميق. التحقيقات الخاصه اللي هي ايش؟ بمعنى ايش الاشياء اللي احنا نستعملها في التحقيق العادي، بس نستعملها بطريقه جدا خاصه وعميقه في تحقيق جريمه غسل الاموال. منها مثلا تسليم المراقب، هذا مثال. شيء اخر جميل جدا في قانون غسل الاموال، يعني مكافحه غسل الاموال وتمويل الارهاب، اللي هي التدابير الوقائيه. ومن الصباح احنا بعد نفس الشيء، سواء كنا نتكلم عن القانون القطري او القانون الدولي، كثير تطرقوا لهذا الجانب. شنو هي التدابير اللي سواء كنا كاشخاص او كمؤسسات ماليه او غير ماليه لابد ان احنا نتبناها على اساس نمنع الجريمه قبل وقوعها. شيء اخر انا تطرقت في بدايه حديثي، قلت الجريمه تحصل في البر، البحر، في كل مكان، حتى الفضاء الالكتروني. القانون عالج هذه النقطه وضم، طبعا احنا ما بندخل بشكل عميق جدا في كل مواد القانون، بس لازم نعرف ان هذا القانون لما تبلور الى ارض الواقع في جهات كثيره كانت داخله في هذا القانون، منها الجمارك. طبعا احنا لما كنا نتكلم بر وبحر وما الى ذلك، القانون تطرق الى الاقرار الجمركي، وهي مساله هامه جدا ترد على كثير تساؤلات تطرقوا لها الزملاء الافاضل في الجلسه الاولى، ان شلون الواحد يضبط. في النهايه انت ما بيكون، ممكن ما تكون فلوس، يعني ممكن تكون اشياء اخرى. فالاقرار الجمركي جدا مهم. ونفس الشيء لما ضربوا مثال المطار، هذا يستعملونه في المطارات بشكل جدا دقيق. موضوع آخر اللي هو التعاون الدولي. التعاون الدولي هو الموضوع ما قبل الأخير، وإن شاء الله بختم بالعقوبات آخر نقطة. التعاون الدولي بالنسبة لي جدا مهم. ليش؟ لأن شخصيا كمحامية جدا تجينا أسئلة كثير على هذا الموضوع، ممارستنا المهنية سواء محليا أو حتى دوليا في القضايا الدولية. موضوع إذا الواحد هل يقدر مثلا يتعاون مع الحكومة الأخرى، يبلغ الحكومة الأخرى، فتظهر أعذار كثيرة. فالقانون طبعا تطرق في المادة 59 إلى الحالات اللي لا يجوز الامتناع عن التعاون الدولي. طبعا حالات احنا كأشخاص ممكن إذا درسنا فروع قانون أخرى نستغرب إن لا، ليش في شيء اسمه سرية. طبعا في القطاع المصرفي يعرفون السرية المصرفية وما إلى ذلك، حتى سرية المعلومات. طبعا في مادة 59 حطت ضوابط معينة وجدا يعني جدا دقيقة. في حال كانت عندنا حالة تستدعي التعاون الدولي لابد من التعاون الدولي، لازم. ولا نستطيع استعمال مثلا سرية المعلومات كحجة، أنا ما بتعاون مع الدولة الفلانية كحجة، إلا من يقدر يستعمل هالمعلومة. إحنا كمحامين، أنا كمحامية أقدر أستعمل هذه الحجة في معرض واقعة معينة، اللي هي إيش؟ لما أنا دافع عن موكلي طبعا أسرار الموكل ما أقدر إني أفصح عنها بصفتي محامية عن هذا الموكل. شيء آخر اختلاف طبيعة السلطات، يعني ما أقدر مثلا أنا من قطر إذا جاني طلب مثلا تعاون دولي من أمريكا أن أنا أرفضه بسبب عدم مثلا توائم السلطات أو القوانين. في النهاية هي الجريمة طبيعتها دولية، يعني لابد أن يتم التعاون. إلا في حالة واحدة طبعا، وهي حالة غير غريبة عن القانونيين عموما، وهي حالة إذا كان الموضوع يمس أمن الدولة. هني الواحد له الحق أنه يمتنع عن التعاون الدولي. ختاما اللي هي نقطة جدا هامة، واللي هي تقريبا تلخص القانون كامل، أو ليش هذا القانون جدا مميز، اللي هي نقطة العقوبات. طبعا احنا لما ندرس القانون أو نمارس القانون في كافة فروعه نلاقي أن العقوبات يا أنها بتكون سالبة للحرية أو بتكون غرامة مالية يعني، وهو يعني نفس الشيء على نفس المنوال قانون غسل الأموال وتمويل الإرهاب اللي صدر 2019. لكن نوعية العقوبات أو مقدار العقوبة في القانون القطري كانت جدا مرتفعة وعالية. ليش؟ طبعا نطبق المبادئ الجنائية عشان تخلق بيئة رادعة أو وعي رادع. الواحد لما يشوف مثلا هذا المقدار من الغرامة أو هذا العدد من السنين في الحبس أو حتى التدابير الأخرى، المصادرة، إغلاق الشركات، الواحد نوعا ما يفكر 100 مرة قبل أن يقترف هذا الفعل. طبعا أنا بذكر بسرد مبالغ مالية وعدد من السنوات اللي هي العقوبات السالبة للحرية اللي هي الحبس، بدون طبعا تحديد الفعل. أقصى عقوبة كانت مذكورة 8 مليون، من 4 مليون إلى 8 مليون ريال قطري. طبعا في عقوبات أخرى تكميلية، مثل إذا كان هذا الشخص اعتباري أو معنوي وليس شخصا طبيعيا، فهني ممكن يغلقون المنشأة. عقوبة أخرى قد تكون من 2 مليون إلى 5 مليون. عقوبة ثانية قد تكون من 5 مليون إلى 10 مليون. وقد يصل الحبس إلى حبس مؤبد. طبعا متى يصل الحبس؟ العقوبة السالبة للحرية متى تصل إلى حبس مؤبد؟ في حالة إيش؟ إذا الجريمة كان فيها تمويل إرهاب. طبعا على قد الفعل على قد ما تكون الجريمة جدا صارمة ورادعة. إذا كان الموضوع يمتد إلى تمويل إرهاب، فالحبس هنا يعني ينتقل من حبس لا يتجاوز 3 سنوات إلى حبس مؤبد. ليش؟ لأن هذه النوع من الجريمة تهدد أمن الدولة، تمس أمن الدولة. في عقوبة أخرى، بما إحنا تطرقنا نربط المعلومات ببعض، بما إن إحنا تطرقنا للجانب الجمركي أو الإقرار الجمركي، في عقوبة وهي تربط تقريبا الكلام اللي أنا بقوله والكلام اللي الزملاء قالوه، لأنهم استعملوا المطار كمثال في أحاديثهم. إذا شخص كتب معلومات خاطئة أو أفصح بطريقة خاطئة أو أقر إقرار خاطئ، فهو عليه عقوبة مالية قد تصل إلى 500,000 ريال. وهذا الشيء تم ذكره في القانون لأهمية وجود أصلا هذا الجهاز في حل الجريمة أو حتى في تحديد الجريمة، تحديد مؤشرات وقوع الجريمة. فالقانون نفس ما قلت 94 مادة، لكن هذه هي الإضاءات اللي احنا حبينا نركز عليها، لأن هي تختصر عملنا احنا كمحامين، ممارستنا لما يكون عندنا قضية غسل أموال. طبعا من تجربة شخصية غالب القضايا اللي اشتغلنا عليها كانت قضايا دولية، يعني اشتغلنا عليها من جانب تنفيذي مع أجهزة الشرطة جنبا لجنب خارج الدولة. هل مرت هذه مثلا تبعات الأموال الغير نظيفة في دولة قطر؟ نعم قضية، لكنها جدا قديمة، 2013 تقريبا أو 2013 تقريبا. أنا أنهي حديثي، أختم حديثي اليوم عند هذه النقطة، وإذا كان عندكم أسئلة أنا مستعدة لجميع الأسئلة بغض النظر عن المواد اللي أنا تطرقت لها، 94 مادة. شكرا لكم.
مساء الخير جميعا. اسمحوا لي بداية قبل ما نحكي بالورقة أتشكر الدكتور هاشم وأتشكر جمعية المحاسبين القانونيين على الاستضافة والمؤتمر الجميل، وشكرا لحضراتكم أن أعطيتونا من وقتكم أن نشارككم بعض المعلومات اللي إن شاء الله تكون مفيدة وتطور، خلينا نحكي من السكيلز والكومبتنسيز تبعوتنا ككومبلاينس براكتيشنرز أو مسؤولي امتثال. اخترت البيبر حقيقة أنه تحكي عن موضوع الفينتك والفاينانشال كرايم أو التكنولوجيا المالية في مكافحة الجرائم المالية. الآن الكاستمرز عم بيبحثوا عن خدمات سريعة، عم بيبحثوا عن إنه البنوك تمكنهم من فتح الحساب ريموتلي أو ما يسمى بالأونلاين أونبوردينج. الكاستمر عم بيبحث إنه يقدر يعمل الترانسفيرز، الإلكترونيك ترانسفيرز بشكل سريع وهو قاعد بالبيت. كل هذا بيعطي خلينا نحكي بريفيليج للكاستمر، بيعطي ميزات للعملاء، ولكنه بنفس الوقت بيعمل تحدي بالنسبة لنا as compliance officers أو أخصائي امتثال ومكافحة الجرائم المالية. يمكن الكاستمر بفضل الخدمة السريعة وبفضل الخدمة عن بعد الكورونا اللي شفناه بسنة 2020، ولكن بالنسبة لنا تغيرت كثير من المعايير اللي بتخص كيف ممكن أقوم بعملية الانفستيجيشن أو due diligence. بداية كنا نتفرج على KYC، على نماذج ورقية لفتح الحساب. الآن ما في، كل شيء عم بيكون داتا على السيستم. ولكن السؤال بالنسبة لي ولحضراتكم، هل الداتا اللي موجودة على السيستم verified؟ هل الداتا الموجودة على السيستم تم التحقق منها؟ هل الداتا فعلا حقيقية؟ ولأي مدى يجب بذل العناية المهنية الواجبة على الكاستمر؟ أو السؤال الأهم، كيف يتم تحديد مخاطر عملائنا؟ اسمحوا لي أقترض كلمة من كلام السيد most important who your customer is or what your customer does. هذا سؤال المفروض انه احنا نساله لانفسنا حقيقه. هل الزبون هو الاكثر اهميه ام فعلا احنا بنعرف كل العملاء تاعونا؟ هل فعلا بنقوم بعمليه التحقيق كما يجب؟ راح اختار مجموعه هيك من المعلومات اللي المفروض خلينا نحكي بتفتح مخنا على حجم الاموال اللي ممكن غسلها حول العالم، حجم البيناليتيز اللي عم تاخذها المؤسسات حول العالم، وقد ايه كميه الاموال اللي بيتم استخدامها في عمليات غسل الاموال وتمويل الارهاب. بعد هيك في عندنا كيس من نات ويست باليو كي رح نحكي عنها ونستفيد من الدروس اللي ممكن ناخذها، لانه من اهم الليسنز ليرند لهي الكيس هو الفنتك، او قديش الترانزاكشن مونيتورنج سيناريوز تبعتنا معايره بالشكل السليم. مثل ما بتعرفوا حضراتكم عندنا حوالي من 2 ل 5% من الجي تي بي from each country، خلينا نحكي من الناتج المحلي الإجمالي بيروح كأموال، بيروح لعمليات مرتبطة بغسل الأموال أو بالجرائم المالية. بالإضافة إنه في عندنا حوالي أكيد الرقم أكثر من هيك بكثير، ولكن هاي الانفورميشن الافيلبل على الببليك دومين، أكثر من 1000 كيس في اليونايتد ستيتس reported as money laundering cases، وكمان في عندنا حوالي أكثر من 2 تريليون وورد وايد، 2 تريليون دولار هدول فلوس خلينا نحكي بتنغسل كل سنة. المبلغ جدا ضخم. في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية لحالها في عندنا حوالي 300 مليار دولار. الكيس الحقيقة أنا اخترتها، يمكن مارسينا this morning حكت عن الجولد وقديش الذهب ممكن يتم استخدامه في عمليات غسل الأموال أو التهرب من العقوبات إلى آخره. الكيس هاي بصراحة بنستفيد منها عشان نتأكد هل السيستمز اللي موجودة عندك بالبنك أو بالمؤسسة المالية أو whatever الانستتيوشن اللي حضرتك عم تشتغل فيها، هل السيستم شغالة مظبوط؟ لأنه نات ويست دفع غرامة مئات الملايين لأنه فقط ما كان عامل ايدنتيفيكيشن للكاش ديبوزيت، انها والله هاي كاش ديبوزيت. كان بعض الترانزاكشنز او عدد كثير كبير من الترانزاكشن السيستم بيقراها كايداع شيك، واكيد حضراتكم تعرف قد ايه الفرق ما بين الايداع النقدي والايداع الشيك. دائما الايداع النقدي بتكون مخاطر غسل الاموال او مخاطر تمويل الارهاب فيه اكثر. بس هيك يعني خلينا نشارك مع حضراتكم مجموعه من المعلومات عن هاي الكيس ستادي، نشوف شو اللي صار السنه الماضيه بسنه 2021 بنات ويست، نشوف قد ايه الفلوس اللي تم ايداعها كانت خلينا نحكي بروسيدز اوف كرايم، قد ايه مقدار الغرامه اللي دفعها هذا البنك، وايش اللي حصل اكزاكتلي عندهم، بالاضافه الى الحديث عن الفيليرز اللي صارت عند هاي المؤسسه واللي ممكن من خلالها انه احنا نستفيد انه هذا الشيء ما يصير في مؤسساتنا. من سنه 2012 لسنه 2016 تمكن هذا الشخص اللي شايفينه حضراتكم، او مثل ما بيحكي مارتن، دائما بيلبسوا بدلات رسميه، دائما بيحاولوا يكونوا خلينا نحكي very polite، بيحاولوا يكونوا اشخاص ترغب بالتعامل معهم. قيمه المبالغ اللي قاموا بايداعها هو وكمان 7 اشخاص اخرين حوالي 365 مليون باوند، منهم 264 مليون ان كاش. الكريمنال اوفنس، كانت الدكتوره عم تحكي عن الجرائم الاصليه او شو الكريمنال اوفنس اللي ناتجه عن هاي الفلوس. هاي الفلوس من وين جابوها؟ حقيقه كانت هاي الفلوس عباره عن جريمه، كانوا يجيبوا سبائك الفضه ويطلوها على انها ذهب ويبيعوها للناس على انها ذهب حقيقي. وبياخذوا هاي الفلوس. طبعا هاي تعتبر بروسيد اوف كرايم، او خلينا نحكي اموال ناتجه عن جريمه اصليه، ومن ثم يتم ايداعها في الحسابات المصرفيه. جيمس ستانت او هذا الشخص خلينا نحكي اخذ كفاله بكفاله حماه او والد زوجته انه ياخذ حوالي 10 مليون دولار كفاله مقابل انه ياخذ سبائك ذهبيه. مقابل هاي الكفاله استطاع انه ياخذ ما قيمته حقيقه 10 مليون دولار ويبدا منها عمليه انتاج خلينا نحكي السبائك الذهبيه المزوره. الفيليرز اللي صارت او حسب يعني الافيلبل على الانترنت اخترنا منهم اثنين مهمين جدا. الاول بيحكي انه البنك فشل او صار في عنده مس ايدنتيفايد بعض الكاش ديبوزيت على انها تشيك. فبالتالي من اهم الدروس اللي ممكن ان احنا ناخذها نشوف كل الترانزاكشن كودز اللي موجوده عندنا على السيستم، هل كل الحركات اللي ممكن يعملها الكاستمر تم تحديدها بشكل سليم؟ هل كافه الحركات الماليه الترانزاكشن كود تبعها صحيح؟ لانه مثل ما بنعرف الحركات النقديه مخاطرها اعلى بكثير من اي حركات اخرى غير نقديه. النقطه الثانيه بتحكي عن موضوع قد ايه اهميه الانترنال ريبورتس او الانترنال سارز. لما يجي يكون الفرونت لاينر فور اكزامبل ببلغ الاداره تبعته انه انا شايف في مبالغ نقديه كبيره جدا عم يدعوها ناس معهم سيارات لامبورغيني، معهم سيارات فارهه، ومعهم سيارات رينج روفر، عم يجيبوا كميات كبيره من الاموال بشنات السفر، لانه مثل هيك مبالغ صعب جدا انه انت تخفيها. ولكن ما صار في اجراءات خلينا نحكي من السكند لاين في هذا البنك. اذا بدنا نتعلم من هاي الكيس نتعلم شغلتين مهمين. الاولى قديش السيستم تاعنا عم بيشتغل صح؟ هل عامل ايدنتيفيكيشن للترانزاكشن مونيتورنج او عندك الانظمه اللي بتراقب الحركات الماليه شغاله بشكل سليم؟ هل السيستمز تبعتك شغاله كما يجب؟ او السؤال الاهم قد ايه ذكي السيستم اللي انت عمالك تشتغل عليه؟ من هون نبدا الحديث عن الفنتك او التكنولوجيا الماليه. الان في بالبنوك كافه البنوك عندها انظمه للنيم سكرينينج، تفحص الاسم اذا كان مدرج على قوائم العقوبات، على قوائم الارهاب الى اخره موجود. وايضا عندها ترانزاكشن مونيتورنج سيستمز، انظمه لمراقبه الحركات الماليه، وهذا فعلا موجود. ولكن اللي مش موجود كما يجب هي انظمه مراقبه الحركات المتطوره بحيث تقدر تعمل ما يسمى بالكيس مانجمنت او باداره الحاله. الكيس مانجمنت او اداره الحاله يمكن بيوفر علينا ككومبلاينس اوفيسرز ساعات طويله، او خلينا نحكي ممكن يوفر اكثر من 50% من الديلي وورك اللي احنا بنقوم فيه. يمكن اذا طلع عندي اليرت على سبيل المثال على النظام، راح ابدا بعمليه جمع البيانات ومن ثم تحليلها ومن ثم اتخاذ القرار. الان الكيس مانجمنت سيستمز هي اللي بتعمل لك كل هاي الستبس تقريبا، تستبدل خلينا نحكي الخطوات العاديه باخرى آلية، بتقوم بعمليه جمع البيانات تماما. يعني اذا بدي اشبهها على سبيل المثال، كيف الطبيب بيطلب منك تروح تعمل تحليل دم عند المختبر، وانس انه بتجيب له التحاليل مباشره بيوصف لك الدواء، او بيجي بيحكي لك انه في عندك مشكله، في عندك نقص في الفيتامين كذا، او في عندك مشكله بالحديد الى اخره. نفس الشيء هاي السيستم الان عمالها بتعمل. للاسف معظم البنوك سواء بالريجن او بكل العالم عم بتركز على ايش بنسميه ترانزاكشن مونيتورنج سيستم او انظمه مراقبه الحركات الماليه اللي بتكون مبنيه على سيناريوهات. كليا بكون في عندنا سيستم، والله اي حركه ايداع نقدي فوق 10000 بيطلع عندي اليرت، اي حركه شيك او حواله فوق ثريشولد معين بيطلع اليرت. ولكن السؤال قد ايه عدد الحركات المشبوهه من اجمالي عدد التنبيهات اللي بيظهرها النظام؟ رح تكتشف انه انت بتشتغل عدد كثير كبير من الكي واي سيز. You are processing a lot of KYCs a day. You are investigating a lot of alert every day. But at the end everything كله تمام. ما في عندك اي امور انت مشتبه فيها. هذا الشيء بده يخليك ترجع to reconsider شو الاسلوب او خلينا نحكي المايند سيت المفروض اني انا استخدمه في عمليه مكافحه غسل الاموال في المؤسسات اللي انا بشتغل فيها. يمكن سيستمز موجود وبيطلع لي اليرت، ولكن لو أعطيت حضراتكم مثال بسيط، حركة $10,000 لشخص خلينا نحكي دخله الشهري $400 راح تكون مبلغ ضخم بالنسبة للKYC تاعه، صح ولا لا؟ في المقابل إذا في عندي حركة $10,000 لشخص extremely wealthy وعنده cash intensive business راح تكون ولا شيء. فبالتالي السيستم تبعك ممكن يكون عم بيعمل جنريت لأليرتس لأي ترانزاكشن فوق $10,000 بدون ما ياخذ بعين الاعتبار شو التايب اوف بزنس تبع الكاستمر. يمكن لو مثلا تصير حركه بوينت اوف سيل او حركه كريدت كارد على اوتيل ريتز كارتون في حسابه لدى اكس من البنوك، شيء عادي جدا انه يصير في ترانزاكشن الساعه 10 بالليل. اما يصير في حركه بوينت اوف سيل على حساب لمدرسه بتنام الساعه 8 للساعه 5، اذا صار في عندي حركه الساعه 10 بالليل بنفس الاماونت بنفس المبلغ بتكون unusual، بتكون غير عاديه. فبالتالي اصبح موضوع التركيز على المبلغ غير كافي، لابد من ربط المبلغ مع الKYC تبع الكاستمر مع البروفايل او التايب اوف بزنس اللي هو يعني خلينا نحكي نسميه السيكتور او القطاع الاقتصادي اللي بينتمي له العميل. اذا بدنا نفوت مور ديتيلز بشكل يعني سريع، في نقطتين مهمين حابب احكي فيهم اليوم بعد اذن حضراتكم، اللي هو الارتفيشال انتليجنس والروبوتك بروسيس اوتوميشن. نبدا بالروبوتك بروسيس اوتوميشن لانه تم توظيفه بشكل كثير كبير في عمليه مراقبه الحركات الماليه. شو الروبوتك بروسيس اوتوميشن او اتمته العمليات الروبوتيه؟ اذا صدر عندك تنبيه، قبل شوي كنا نحكي كافه البنوك عندها انظمه تصدر تنبيه اذا صار في عندهم ترانزاكشن فوق مبلغ محدد. الروبوتك بروسيس اوتوميشن بيقوم بكل عمليات جمع البيانات، وبيجي بيحكي لك فور اكزامبل كيف التحليل الطبي اللي بيطلبه مثلا الطبيب من المريض، نفس الشيء بيجي بيحكي لك هذا الكاستمر كل الفلوس تبعته بتفوت على الحساب عن طريق الكاش، وكل الفلوس تبعت الديبت سايد اوف ذا اكونت عم تطلع بواير ترانسفير. الكونتريز اللي بيتعامل معهم الكاستمر تبعك هو 1 2 3. اللوكيشنز تبعون الATM والبرانشز اللي بيتعامل معهم الكاستمر بيعطيك ماب، بيجي بيحكي لك هذا هو الاسلوب اللي بيشتغل فيه الكاستمر تاعك. فبالتالي بيقدر يعطيك كم كبير جدا من المعلومات اللي ممكن تمكنك من اتخاذ القرار بشكل اسرع واكثر كفاءه. يمكن لو فكرنا مثلا اذا في عندي جمعيه خيريه على سبيل المثال قامت بعمليه سحب نقدي بمبلغ ضخم، يمكن احنا از كومبلاينس بروفيشنال بنروح ناحيه التورست فاينانسنج، لانه الماني لاندرر بده يروح يودع امواله في النظام المالي، ما بده ياخذ فلوسه ان كاش. نفس الشيء عمليات غسل الاموال لابد ان تشكل في مجملها مبلغ ضخم، صح ولا لا؟ لابد ان تشكل في المجمل تبعها مبلغ ممكن يكون مئات الالوف او حتى الملايين. الروبوتك بروسيس اوتوميشن تم توظيفه في عدد كثير كبير من الانظمه الخاصه في مكافحه غسل الاموال، اما الارتفيشال انتليجنس او الذكاء الاصطناعي لسه ما اخذ خلينا نحكي الشيب الواضح او الشكل الواضح، لانه عمليه اتخاذ القرار اللي ممكن تتم من خلال الارتفيشال انتليجنس بالنسبه لنا ككومبلاينس اوفيسرز مش مريحه او بتخوفني، لانه انا القرار اللي ممكن اخذه اني انا ارفع تقرير اشتباه فيك للسلطات او للFIU الفاينانشال انتليجنس يونت او وحده مكافحه غسل الاموال. ولكن ستيل حتى الان في مجموعه من الافكار الجميله حقيقه، انه مثلا ممكن يظهر لك النظام ريبورت بيحكي لك هدول ال 15 حساب 15 اكونتس لازم ترفع فيهم سار. واو، طب كيف السيستم عرف؟ بحكي لك هدول بيشتغلوا بنفس الباترن لحساب انت اوريدي رفعت فيه تقرير اشتباه في الساعات الماضيه. بالتالي بيمكنك من انك تكتشف عدد كثير كبير من خلينا نحكي الكاستمرز اللي بيستخدموا حساباتهم بنفس الانستركشنز، اذا كانوا مثلا عصابه بياخذوا نفس الانستركشنز، فاتس نوت لوجيك انك تمسك 1 اكونت من 16 اكونت، صح ولا لا؟ فبالتالي الروبوتك بروسيس اوتوميشن والارتفيشال انتليجنس اشياء وي شود كونسيدر، اشياء مهمه جدا في عمليات الرقابه الماليه، في عمليات تقارير الاشتباه. ومثل ما كنا نحكي عدد الترانزاكشن اللي بصير باليوم ضخم جدا. وتفضل السيد مارتن الصبح حكى عن المطار وعقبت عليه كمان الدكتوره ريم، قد ايه لازم نتعلم من المطارات شو الموديل اللي استخدموه وفعلا موديل ناجح. نفس الشيء احنا في البانكينج سيكتور لازم نستخدم موديل مشابه بيمكننا من اكتشاف الحركات المشبوهه، ولكن وهذا شيء نأكد عليه بدون ما نزعج باقي الكاستمرز. يمكن حضراتكم تشتغلوا في البانكينج سيكتور تسمعوا كثير من الكومبلينتس اللي بيعملوها الكاستمر، احكي لك الانفستيجيشن ستيبس او النمبر اوف كويستشنز اللي عمالك تسال لي اياها لكل حركه ماليه بالنسبه لي مزعج. وفي كثير من الحالات ومثل ما بنعرف 99.9 اذا مش اكثر من الكاستمر سبقونا لا بيغسلوا اموال ولا بيمولوا ارهاب. فكيف بدنا نكافح عمليه غسل الاموال بدون ما نزعج او without bothering legitimate customers او الكاستمرز اللي ما بيقوموا باي عمليه غسل اموال او تمويل ارهاب او حتى حركات مشبوهه. يمكن عمليه الريسك بيس ابروتش اللي حكت فيها الFATF او الفاتف بالتوصيه رقم 1 مهمه جدا، ولكن عمليه تطبيقها في ارض الواقع مش بالامر السهل. يعني من ضمن اكثر الاخطاء شيوعا عم نشوفها المؤسسات الماليه اللي بتقوم بعمليه تصنيف الحركات الماليه وفقا لتصنيف مخاطر العميل، وهذا شيء مش سليم. لانه ممكن اكون انا هاي ريسك كاستمر واقوم بترانزاكشن ب $50، وبالتالي الترانزاكشن مبلغها جدا بسيط لا تحتاج للتحقيق، ولكن ستيل الكاستمر تبعها هيز بيب فور اكزامبل او مرتفع المخاطر لاي سبب اخر. ما بصير اشبك الترانزاكشن مونيتورنج سيستم تاعي بشو الريسك سكور تبع الكاستمر. الريسك سكور زي ما كانوا بيحكوا زي بالمطار، مين من الناس اللي بدي افتح الشنطه تبعته وافتشها مانيوال قبل ما احط اللاجج او احط الحقيبه تبعته بالمطار؟ وانس انه كليتهم فاتوا الطياره، جزء منهم تفتشت حقائبهم مثل ما حكى مستر مارتن، جزء منهم مشي سموثلي، ولكن at the end كليتهم طلعوا الطياره. فبالتالي that's why كليتهم بالنسبه لنا كاستمرز بالرغم من انه المخاطر تبعتهم مختلفه. once انه they are customers they have successfully opened an account، بصفي الفوكس او الكونسنتريشن على الترانزاكشنز اللي بيقوموا فيها. فبالتالي that's why اسمه transaction monitoring system مش AML system، اسمه نظام مراقبه الحركات الماليه. من هون احنا بنبدا، من هون نقدر نحدد شو الحركات المشبوهه، ومن هون السيستم ممكن يساعدني بانه يبني كيس مانجمنت، انه يبني عمليه جمع البيانات واجراء المزيد من التحري والتحليل واعطاء حتى التوصيات، عشان ما يكون خلينا نحكي الستاف او التيم تاعك ضايع كل نهاره بجمع بيانات ممكن من خلال السيستم او تطوير التولز اللي ممكن يستخدموها الموظفين، اوفر عليهم حجم كثير كبير من الاوقات. الكاستمر ريسك بيصير بالعاده له ثلاث غايات خلينا نحكي. الاول اللي هو الليفل اوف دي ديليجنس، قد ايه مستوى العنايه الواجب اللي ممكن انا او المطلوب مني اني انا ابذله على الكاستمر. والثاني الليفل اوف اثوريتي او شو المستوى خلينا نحكي المفروض اني اخذ موافقته عشان تو اكسبت الكاستمر. مثلا الفاتف بتحكي روح خذ المانجمنت ابروفل عشان تو اكسبت ا بيب كاستمر فور اكزامبل. فبالتالي هذا سبب وجيه لعمليه تصنيف العملاء. بالنهايه هو الKYC ابديت كمان، كل متى ارجع اعمل ريفيزيت للداتا اللي معطيني اياها الكاستمر. يعني فور اكزامبل هلا بالفاتكا والCRS معظم نماذج الفات مثلا W8 بن اي تحتاج الاكسبيريشن تبعها نهايه السنه الثالثه من تاريخ توقيع النموذج. فبالتالي we have to ask الكاستمر انه يرجع يوقع لي نماذج جديده، الا اذا كان خلينا نحكي التاكس ستاتس او حاله الضريبه تبعته اختلفت. اذا بتلاحظ ما في ولا سبب من هدول الاسباب له علاقه بالحركات الماليه. الكاستمر ريسك ريتنج ما له دخل ابدا بالكاستمر ترانزاكشن. That's why نعتبره احنا من اكثر الاخطاء شيوعا من خلال المؤسسات الماليه وعلى راسها البنوك. I guess I'm done. اذا في اي استفسارات من حضراتكم ممكن ناخذهم بنهايه السيشن. مش هيك؟ شكرا جزيلا.
السلام عليكم. I want to start by thanking Mr. Hashim Said and the Qatari Association for Public Accounting for the kind invitation and for the amazing organization. And I would like to take you through the pattern that regulates the financial crimes regulations and other legal instruments, demonstrating also the roles and responsibilities of the regulatory authorities. It is an extensive presentation, however, it's a time will not permit us to go through every page of it. You are more than welcome to take a copy from the organizers. So we would like to cover the definition of the financial crime and the main legal instruments and legal entities that are responsible to combat the financial crimes in the state of Qatar, including the National Anti-Money Laundering and Terrorism Financing Committee, Qatar Financial Information Unit, Qatar Central Bank, Qatar Financial Center Regulatory Authority, and Qatar Financial Center, Qatar Financial Markets Authority, and of course going through the main law to combat financing of terrorism and money laundering, in addition to 3 or 4 other legislation that are relevant to have a complete overview on the financial crimes in the Qatari legal system. We'd like first to focus on the definition of the financial crimes without taking you to a lot of theoretical definitions. In principle, the main activities that are covered usually by the definition of financial crime are the money laundering, terrorism financing, fraud, cybercrime, bribery, and corruption. And as you can imagine, because of the scene today and all the distinguished speakers that have spoken prior to me, the main 2 significant types of financial crimes are money laundering and financing of terrorism. The main legal instrument to combat money laundering and terrorism financing was issued in September 2019, law number 20 for the year 2019 that Dr. Bin al-Ansari demonstrated as the key principles of it. That law came to replace the law number 4 for the year 2010. The law number 4 of 2010, I had the honor to be one of the main drafters of it when I used to serve in the Millennium and in the Council of Ministers of the State of Qatar. And it applies to the financial institutions and the designated non-financial businesses and professionals operating in would like to take you through the main elements of the legislations and the main features that is expanding the definition of predictive offense against which money laundering behavior may take place to include all crimes and misdemeanors. That is to enlarge the scope of the application of the legislation and switching from application to custom disclosures whereby the travelers are required to disclose their foreign currency position at the request of the custom authorities to a custom declaration system that obliges all travelers to disclose their foreign currency position on their own if they reach or exceed the limit determined by the executive regulations. And it has reinforced the role of the National Anti-Money Laundering and Terrorism Financing Committee in a way that enables it to assess the national system and supervise its proper functioning. And it empowers the Financial Information Unit, the FIU, the regulatory authorities and the law enforcement agencies to ensure proper implementation of the law and achieve the required effectiveness, strengthen the international cooperation mechanism for all national entities in the field of combating money laundering, terrorism financing, and predictive offense, increase the criminal sanctions related to violations of the provisions of the law. And as you can imagine, and maybe as most of you know, because most of you are working in the banking industry, the state of Qatar was subject to a most recent review, and the review that was done by national and global financial system. The main functions are preparing the national risk assessment on money laundering, terrorism financing, and the financing of proliferation of weapons, of mass destruction, supervise the national risk assessment completion, and document, circulate, and update the assessment results. A competent authority to provide the national committee with the required data and information and assist in the achievement of the assessment and the execution of its findings. The second objective is to develop and follow up the execution of the national strategy to combat money laundering, terrorism financing, and financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in the state of Qatar, based on the assessment findings and in accordance with the applied international standards. And the third objective is to supervise the coordination, cooperation, and exchange of information process between the relevant authorities in relation to the policy making and execution, develop and execute activities aiming to combat money laundering, terrorism financing, and financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in line with the personal data information protection measures and other similar provisions. These are the remaining of the objectives of the committee: to review and follow up the international developments in relation to combating money laundering and financing of terrorism, represents the state of Qatar in meeting and the activities organized by the AML or CFT regional and international organization, coordinate with the National Counterterrorism Committee. It is a committee that is established and empowered by the terrorism combating legislation. We will go through it in a few minutes in order to harmonize the efforts in relation to the international, regional, and global to combating terrorism financing. Coordinate with the Administration, Control, and Transparency Authority in relation to the execution of the United Nations Convention against Corruption. Collect, classify, analyze AML and CFT-related data and statistics. Request relevant data from competent entities where these entities are members in the committee or not, in order to use such data and statistics in the development of a national risk assessment, the AML and CFT national strategy and other relevant purposes. Coordinate and host AML and CFT national training programs. So this is the main body that was assigned by the new legislation to oversee the entire framework of the combating of money laundering and financing of terrorism. And comes after that the main effective on the level of the implementation and the execution, the FIU, which is responsible of to serve as the National Center for Receiving and Analyzing Suspicious Transaction Reports received from financial institutions and FQDs, as well as other information relating to the money laundering, associated with offense and terrorism financing, and the other crimes prescribed by the law. The FIU of Qatar conducts tactical and operation analysis using the available information it may receive related to money laundering and terrorism financing and related offenses. It also conducts strategic analysis to identify money laundering and terrorism financing related trends and patterns in the state of Qatar. FIU also cooperates closely with the anti-money laundering and counter finance of terrorism national authorities to exchange financial information related to the suspicious ML or FT transactions, and is keen to establish a trusted relationship with the ENFPPs and non-profit organizations, supervisory authorities, and coordinate with them in relation to suspicious transaction reports and the information related to money laundering associated with the offenses and the terrorism finance. The unit, in key terms, is responsible, as we demonstrated, receiving the suspicious transactions reports, analyzing the reports and taking the proper decision in close cooperation with the relevant authorities and other foreign counterparties. Disseminate the analysis results as needed to the competent agencies in the state, being Public Prosecution, Ministry of Interiors, State Audit Bureau, or other supervisory authorities and decision makers. That was the main two entities that the law number 20 has established for the combating of anti-money laundering and finance of terrorism. We will go now to the other regulatory bodies that are operating in the state of Qatar, and they are responsible to a great extent of the implementation of the laws, and they have also their own rules and regulations that they have issued to the subjects of their review and supervisory authority to make sure that they are in compliance with the applicable legislations in the state. This was a demonstration of the main functions of the central bank. The main point that we would like to concentrate for the Central Bank of Qatar, that they issued instructions to maintain and enhance and protect the credibility, integrity of reputation of financial institutions in Qatar, ensure the financial institutions in Qatar comply with AML, CFT laws and these instructions, protect financial institutions' operation in Qatar, ensure the implementations of policies, procedures, system, and control to prevent, detect, control, and report incidents of money laundering or terrorism financing. The instructions that were issued by the central bank were requirements for AML and CFT policies, that the AML and CFT policies, procedure, system, and controls of a financial institution must be risk-sensitive, appropriate, adequate, and must have regard to the risk of money laundering and terrorism financing, and the size, complexity, and nature of the business. And the main principles that the central bank is trying to achieve with these instructions, and by the way, they are very similar for the same principles for the QFCRA. As you know, QFCRA also reports to the governor of the central bank as per the central bank law. So these are the main principles setting the responsibility of the board and top management in designing the entire framework in the organization, make sure that the system is functioning and implemented. The second principle is a risk-based approach, that a financial institution must adopt a risk-based approach to the requirements of these instructions of the central bank. Knowing your customer, a financial institution must know each of its customers to the extent appropriate to the customer's risk profile. As Mr. Ahmed was explaining now, effective reporting, that a financial institution must have effective measures in place to ensure internal and external reporting whenever money laundering or terrorism finance is known or suspected. The fifth principle, that high standard screening and appropriate training should be adopted by the financial institutions to ensure high standards when appointing or employing officers and employees, and must also have an appropriate ongoing anti-money laundering and counter-finance of terrorism training program for its officers and employees. And the sixth principle is evidence of compliance, that any financial institution must demonstrate by documents that it has implemented all the key principles that are required in the instructions. This is, again, a detailed requirement by the central bank for a program that every financial institution in the state of Qatar must develop and update, and it should include more or less a reflection of the principles that we were demonstrating now by establishing and developing and managing the required policies, appropriate compliance management arrangements, having timely access to customer identification details, adequate screening procedures when appointing the employees and officers, appropriate ongoing training programs to officers and employees, adequately resourced and independent audit function to test compliance of the AML and FT policies and procedures and control, ongoing assessment and review of the financial institutions, policies, procedures, and control, and independent review and test of the financial institutions' compliance with AML and CFT. Again, these are the rest of the requirements of the central bank in relation to the customer due diligence and ongoing monitoring, record keeping and retention, detection of suspicious transactions, internal and external reporting obligation, internal communication of the financial institutions, of the policies, procedures, system, and controls, any other issues that may be required under the AML and CFT. As you can imagine, the central bank is trying, as the main regulator for the financial institutions, to make sure that the provisions of the applicable legislation are not only left there theoretically, but implemented in details and showing for the observers and the reviewers, as the FATFO is doing that, the state of Qatar and the regulatory authorities and the supervisory authorities are taking the serious needed actions to implement the provisions of the law. The same goes also for the QFC and the QFCRA. As you know, QFCRA is responsible of the financial regulated activities in the Qatar Financial Center, and the Qatar Financial Center Authority is responsible for the ancillary activities and service providers that are registered to serve the financial institutions in the QFCRA. Both QFC and QFCRA are very strict in relation to the anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism. The regulatory authority has issued 2 rule books that regulates AML and CFT within the Qatar Financial Center. Of course, as you can imagine, any entity that is operating in QFC or licensed by the QFC and QFCRA are subject by all means to the Qatari legislation, as it is a criminal law, and as you can imagine, QFC and QFCRA are not exempt from the application of the criminal laws of the state of Qatar. But in addition to that, the entities has to comply with the rules that are issued by the QFCRA in relation to the AML and CFT. These rules are the anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism rules for the year 2019, and the anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism general insurance rules 2019. These rules applies to all the authorized firms and DNFBP, including financial services firms and other professional services, as our own law firm, such as lawyers, auditors, accountants, and trust service providers, and were designed to be in accordance with the Qatari AML and CFT law and aligned to the global regulatory recommendations and standards. If you see the principles that the QFCRA has built its rules issued for the AML and CFT, you will see that they are more or less similar or exactly the same as the principles that were followed by the Qatar Central Bank. There is also another important authority that is responsible for the listed entities and funds, Qatar Financial Market Authorities. It has done lots of projects with international organizations to build a resilient system in the market to combat the anti-money laundering and the finance of terrorism through lots of trainings, programs, and strict compliance with applicable laws in that field. I will not go through the provisions of the law. We wanted to go through some risk-based approach and the preventive measures and the customer due diligence in the Law 20 and the risk assessment and then the sanctions and the enforcement. Only a small remark, as you can imagine, not in every Qatari legislation you will have the two sides of the administrative sanctions and the criminal penalties. Many people will mix between these two things. The administrative sanctions are sanctions that are in the hands of the regulatory authorities, such as the central bank, UFMA, and so on. And they don't need to go back to the judge to issue them. They can go and implement a fine or a measure against the bank or the listed entity, depending on the legislation, of course. And these administrative sanctions are implemented with immediate effect. Of course, there is some procedures for the appeal of these sanctions, but they are not criminal penalties. So if you violate, the central bank can implement an administrative sanction, and then they can refer the case also to the public prosecution, and the entity will be prosecuted and penalized with the criminal penalties that are in addition to the administrative sanctions that were there to try to mitigate and bring again the entity subject to the sanction to the right approach. Relevant laws are law number 27 for the year 2019, refreshing the 2004 law again to combat terrorism, and the decision number 1 for the year 2020, regulating the implementation mechanisms of the targeted financial sanctions, and the relevant provisions in the Penal Code of Qatar, 11 for the year 2004 in relation to the bribery and corruption, and the law number 15 for the year 2014 for the regulating of the charitable activities, where the authority had some authorities in controlling in a very strict manner the activities of the NGOs and the charitable activities in the state of Qatar. And finally, the law in relation to combat the cybercrime that sets the substantive crimes as per the law and the related provisions for obtaining the evidences and submitting them and admitting them to the judicial authorities in addition to the standard international cooperation provisions. Thank you very much for your patience, and again, I'm very honored to be with you, and I will be available for any questions, or if you want to have a copy of the full presentation, it will be with the organizers of the conference. Thank you again.
بخصوص اللي تفضل فيه الحالة العملية اللي تفضل فيها الأستاذ أحمد عن بنك اسمه نات ويست، واللي فهمناه أنه كان عندهم خطأ في النظام بعدم تحديد طبيعة التحصيلات سواء كانت أو المقبوضات سواء كانت نقدية أو شيكات. والله من الصعب التصديق أو الاستنتاج أنه هذه كانت نتيجة خطأ، لأنه يعني نحن عم بتقول أنه في عام 2021 يعني أنا هلا بروح على مطعم فول بطلب يا ربي سندويشة بيعطيني إيصال ببين لي طبيعة كيف دفعت قيمتها كاش أو بطاقة، فكيف في مؤسسة مالية وعم نحكي ب 2021؟ فأعتقد هذه أكثر هي التصديق أكثر هي شيء متعمد، وخصوصا أنه ثبت لاحقا أنه في جزء كبير هو معتبر من المعاملات كانت غسل أموال، فهذه ليست خطأ، أعتقد أنه عمل متعمد أليس يعني بس للنقاش. شكرا.
شكرا كثير على السؤال. إذا بجوز حضرتك بتلاحظ على الإنترنت كتبوا شو القاضي حكى عن الكيس. القاضي صرح إنه ما في أي تواطؤ من قبل البنك مع غاسلي الأموال، وهذا اللي إحنا كمؤسسات مالية بنواجهه. إحنا ما بنتواطأ مع غاسلي الأموال، ولكن إحنا بنفشل باكتشاف عمليات غسل الأموال وإجراء الريبورتينج اللازم. إذا انتبهت من ضمن الفيليرز إنه ما كان في أكشن من قبل خلينا نحكي الجهات المعنية داخليا أنها تقوم بعمليات الإبلاغ للكومبتنت اثوريتيز او الاف اي يو انه انا في عندي عمليات مشبوهه في عمليات غسل الاموال. فهذا حصل انه انتم كاداره الفرونت لاينرز او الناس اللي بيتعاملوا مع الكاستمر شافوا انه في شيء خلينا نحكي unusual او شيء مشتبه به وانتم ما قمتوا بعمليه الابلاغ. فبالتالي هذا المعلومات اللي المتاحه من الريجوليتر، هاي المعلومات الموجوده على الانترنت، ولكن لا اعتقد انه البنك ما يكون عنده هذا الخطا وتم التصريح انه هذا الخطا موجود. في المؤسسات الماليه وخصوصا المؤسسات الماليه الضخمه اللي في عندهم عدد كاستمرز كثير كبير، عمليه المونيتورنج وعمليه يعني انا اشتغلت في مؤسسات ماليه حقيقه اكتشفنا انه السيستم في عدد كثير كبير من الترانزاكشنز completely outside الامبريلا تبع الترانزاكشن مونيتورنج. يعني اعطيك مثال، في بعض الحسابات اذا ما كان تم تصنيفها از individual ولا corporate completely برا الترانزاكشن مونيتورنج سيستم. هذا الخطا اكتشفوا البنك ليتر اون، بحكي لك انا بصير في عندي حركات ماليه بمبلغ ضخم ولكن ما عم بيطلع عليها اليرت. فلما عملنا ديبر انفستيجيشن تنشوف شو المشكله اللي موجوده عند البنك، اكتشفنا انه الحساب مش كلاسيفايد. لازم يكون كلاسيفايد لانه الترانزاكشن مونيتورنج سيستم ما بيقرا الا اذا كان ريتيل او كوربوريت، لانه في ثريشولد مختلف ما بين الريتيل والكوربوريت. فهل في اخطاء بالسيستمز؟ 100%. ما في خلينا نحكي حاله مثاليه او خلينا نحكي كليتنا عم نكون نشتغل بشكل 100% ما في عندنا اي نوع من الاخطاء، ولكن كل ما زاد عدد الكاستمر تبعونا كل ما كان في فلوس كثير ان اند اوت، كل ما صارت المهمه علينا اصعب. That's why التركيز على السيستمز. يعني فور اكزامبل let's say السيستم تبعهم فرضا اكتشف كل الحركات الايداع النقديه. let's say الام ال ار اوز قاموا بعمليه الريبورتنج للجهات المعنيه، فبالتالي كان البنك نفسه هو اللي اكتشف العمليه وهو اللي قام بالتبليغ عنها، بدلا من انه ياخذ غرامه اكثر بكثير من الاموال اللي تم غسلها من خلال البنك. شكرا لك.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أخوكم محمد سيف الخيارين، رئيس قسم الحوكمة في بنك قطر الوطني. حاب أسأل بس الأخت الدكتورة المحامية ريم الأنصاري بخصوص طبيعة جريمة غسيل الأموال اللي وضحتها وكانت متشعبة كثير وفيها عديد من الأطراف ومستوى طبعا محلي ودولي. قد يتورط بعض الأشخاص في مثل هذه الجرائم دون علمهم يعني، وهذا وارد أن يستغلون يعني سواء كان شخص طبيعي أو اعتباري. وفي صعوبة طبعا مثل ما تفضلت هي في الحصول على بعض المعلومات سواء على الصعيد المحلي أو الدولي نظرا لسرية المعلومات أو عدم مرونة التواصل الدولي في بعض الدول. فالسؤال شوي عملي اللي هو مدى صعوبة مهمة الدفاع من قبل المحامين كونها محامية عن موكليها في مثل هذا النوع من القضايا، وهل عدد القضايا التي قد يتم حفظها لعدم كفاية الأدلة يعني عددها كبير ونسبة براءة المتهمين المتورطين بشكل عام وبشكل خاص اللي يعني دون علمهم طبعا، ومدى قيام المتهم أو المتورط مثل هذا في حال يعني علمه بتورطه في مثل هذه الجرائم التبليغ مباشرة للجهات الأمنية، مع أنه تورط وساهم في تسهيل مثل هذا النوع من الجرائم. يعني لو تبين لنا صلاحية النيابة العامة مثلا في مثل عمل تسوية، وكذلك السلطة التقديرية للقضاء في مجال يعني تكون فيها اعتبار أن الشخص هذا بلغ، لأن طبعا صعب اكتشاف مثل هالعملية يعني، فتبليغه قد يكشف العملية اللي لا يمكن أحد أن يكتشفها طبعا يعني من غير التبليغ. ويعطيكم العافية.
شكرا مقدرة لك يا أخي الكريم. سؤالك يعني أنت عطيتني فرصة أقول كل اللي ما قدرت أقوله على المنصة. بحاول أختصر يعني أجوب كل سؤال أعطيك جواب يعني دقيق عليه. نفس ما قلت من خلال ممارستي للمهنة تحديدا العمل على قضايا غسل الأموال، طبعا هني أحط بين قوسين على العمل عليها من الجانب الدولي، يعني أنا كنت جزء من فريق دولي، فريق محامين دوليين. نقطة موضوع الشخص المتورط أو غير متورط يعلم أو لا يعلم، الجميل في القانون إنه حط لنا مخرج اللي هي مسألة الإبلاغ. الشخص إذا بلغ ممكن تخف وطأة العقوبة. الشخص يدري متورط أو غير متورط، وما هو في نهاية هذا الاستنتاج هو بيعرف أنه متورط إذا تم استدعائه. طبعا في النهاية يقع الإثبات عليه هو شلون يثبت أنه ما كان جزء من هذه العملية. بس مثل ما قلت لك القانون منح مخرج لهذا النوع من الحالات أن الشخص ممكن يطلع منها إذا بلغ. طبعا الفترة الزمنية جدا مهمة، قبل علم السلطات وما ذلك، هذا كله مكتوب في القانون. رقم 2 بالنسبة حق حفظ القضايا لعدم كفاية الأدلة، تحصل نعم من واقع عملي يحفظون القضايا لعدم كفاية الأدلة، بس بعد الجميل في الموضوع مسألة هي قانونية، القانونيين الموجودين معنا في القاعة يعرفونها، هي مسألة التقادم. حتى لو حفظت القضية لا تتقادم، يعني لا زالت هنالك فرصة أن الواحد يجمع الأدلة الكافية يعني حتى تتبلور الوقائع وتتكون يعني تكون لنا جريمة فعلية، وفي النهاية اللي لازم يتحاسب بيتحاسب. فهذه مسألة التقادم نوعا ما أخي الكريم، كل شيء أنت تطرح عليه أنا أحاول أطلع لك مخرج من القانون. من ناحية ممارستنا إيش الأشياء اللي إحنا نسويها مع الموكل أو كيف ندافع عنه، نرجع حق البداية. أنا قلت لك إحنا نعمل ضمن فريق عمل، الموضوع كله ما يعتمد علي أنا كمحامية، إحنا نشكل فريق. الفريق طبعا مثل ما تفضلوا الأخوة الأفاضل والزملاء سواء في الجلسة الأولى والثانية، بتلاحظ أخي الكريم أنهم تكلموا عن مؤسسات. لما بتكلمني كمحامية ممارسة للمهنة واشتغلت على هالنوع من القضايا، صح أنا عندي فريق بس مش مؤسسات، بس ناس يشغلون مناصب معينة. إذا لاحظت وأنا أتكلم قلت لك أجهزة الشرطة، نعم إحنا اشتغلنا مع الشرطة، هل الشرطة القطرية لا شرطة خارجية يعني خارج الدولة، الشرطة جزء من الموضوع. إذا بنتكلم داخل الدوحة النيابة جزء من الموضوع، في أكثر من شخص في فريق العمل يساهم في النهاية يكمل ملفي اللي أنا باخذه بوديه معي المحكمة. طبعا لما نتكلم عن المحكمة احنا نتكلم عن موكل شخص محامي، شيء بسيط جدا، بس نوعية القضايا اللي كنا جزء منها هي تتكلم عن محاكم دولية، فهي ما تكون شخص بعينه، ممكن تكون شيل كومبانيز أو هذه المؤسسات الغير حقيقية ما تكون موجودة في أرض الواقع. فأنت في النهاية حتى أنت كمحامي أنت ما تعرف خصمك، أصلا ما تعرف خصمك هل هو حقيقي أو غير حقيقي. طبعا في النهاية أنت بتعرف بناء على عمل الفريق والتكاتف وجمع الأدلة وما إلى ذلك. التحقيقات تلعب دور كبير جدا، ما بقول لك إحنا دخلنا في التحقيقات نفسها يعني وجها لوجه، بس مبلغ قعدنا مع الشخص المعتدي أو نفس ما نقول غاسل الأموال. ففي أشياء كثيرة تلعب يعني لها دور في الموضوع. هل أنا بقدر أقول لك أحط لك إياها مثلا في لستة؟ لا، بقول لك ليش، لأن كل قضية تختلف عن الثانية. في قضايا بدت عندنا من شركة عادية تحولت إلى يعني عموما احنا شو نسميها الجرائم، جرائم الياقات البيضاء، نفس ما قالوا اللي تكلموا قبلنا نايس بيبل، دائما يكونوا الناس مرتبين. بس انا خالف يعني هالمنطلق وهالفكره، لان من خلال الممارسه مو بلازم دائما يكون لطيف ومرتب. تبدا بهذه الطريقه ممكن تنتهي يقول لك جرائم الياقه البيضاء، في ناس يقول لك ليش بيضاء لان ما فيها دم، لا ممكن تنتهي الى جرائم فيها عنف. فدايناميك او طريقه او ستراكشر القضيه نفسها انا ما بقدر اعطيك لسته تقول لك ان انا اتعامل مع هالقضيه بهالطريقه، كل قضيه ولها لسته معينه، ادوات معينه هي متوفره بس على حسبي انا كمحاميه. يعني كل محامي ممكن حد محامي اخر غيري انا يشتغل على نفس القضيه بس بطريقه ثانيه، يعني يستخدم مثلا يباشر في التحقيقات الاوليه عقب يطلب التعاون الدولي. ففي اشياء كثيره، يعني انا اتمنى اكون جاوبتك على الموضوع. شكرا.
مشاركة أخرى؟
Thank you. I'm Dr. Jabarudian, AI artificial intelligence expert in the group securities. So my questions for Mr. Tertier about one saying we are not trusting using the artificial intelligence and machine learning in the decision-making process inside any organization. So my simple explanation, we are always use the artificial intelligence to enhance the decision making inside any organization like financial whatever. But the main challenges for artificial intelligence is the integrity and the completeness of the data, whereas these main factors are very critical. And my question is, are there any internal procedures between the RegTech and FinTech to validate all of these issues to be guaranteed and to enhance the entire process or to reach the target 100%? Thank you.
شكرا كثير على السؤال، سؤال مهم جدا. أكيد الآن موضوع الارتفيشال انتليجنس في ناحية الأيام قل شوي بخوفنا، لأنه أنا ما راح أخلي السيستم يبلغ الاف اي يو إنه هذا الحساب مشتبه فيه غسيل أموال، إلا لما يكون لابد إن يكون في هيومن انترفنشن تكون فيرم، والله في عندي حالات مشبوهة فلازم إني أنا أبلغها. ولكن مثل ما حضرتك تفضلت الارتفيشال انتليجنس احنا في الكومبلاينس عم نطبقه كثير بموضوع النيم سكرينينج. يعني حضرتك اكيد بما انك تشتغل بالمجال وبالاندستري، عدد الفولس بوزيتيف بالنيم سكرينينج يعني خلينا نحكي اكبر مشكله لاي اخصائي امتثال في اي مؤسسه ماليه، وخصوصا اللي بيشتغل على سويفت. باي مؤسسه ماليه يحكي لك شو المشكله اللي عندك، يحكي لك السيستم بيطلع لي عدد كثير كبير من الفولس بوزيتيف، وبالتالي عم بياخذ كثير من وقتي ومن وقت التيم في سبيل تمرير الحركات الماليه. من اهم الخطوات الارتفيشال انتليجنس حاليا عم بشتغلها بالنيم سكرينينج. فور اكزامبل ليتس سي انا والدكتور، انا ميكر والدكتور تشيكر، فانا مرقت الترانزاكشن let's say it's a false positive، الاسم is not the same as the designated tourist for example. وانس نحن مشيناها مره، ممكن السيستم يحكي لك how many time بدك تمشيها، مرتين او 3 مرات، خلاص ما في داعي اني انا استخدم شيء بنسميه inequalities او الجود جاي ليست، او اني احكي للسيستم this is a good guy، او انه ما تطلع لي عليه تنبيهات later on. السيستم لحاله صار يفهم انه والله هذا الهت ليس نفسه الشخص المدرج، فبالتالي الارتفيشال انتليجنس ممتاز في النيم سكرينينج انه يخفف لي الفولس بوزيتيف. حديثا عن الريكتك والريجولاتوري كومبلاينس، باي ذا واي الريجولاتوري كومبلاينس موديل باي ذا جلوبال كومبلاينس انستيتيوت هاز ديسكست هاي الستبس in every single detail: how to calculate the inherent risk, how to measure الكنترولز اللي موجوده عندك، وكيف توصل للريزيدوال ريسك. احنا كلنا عارفين يمكن المعادله تبعت وولسبرغ، انه والله المخاطر المتبقيه هي المخاطر التي تبقى من المخاطر المتاصله بعد وضع الضوابط، صح ولا لا؟ هذا حكي نظري ممتاز، ولكن كيف على السيستم اني انا بدي اطبق الريكتك؟ الريكتك انك تمسك كل الريجوليشنز اللي طلعها السنترال بانك اوف قطر، تعملها اسسمنت وفقا هل هاي راح تسبب لي بينالتي، ما راح تسبب لي بينالتي، قد ايه مقدار اهميتها الى اخره. يعني اعطيك مثال، في بعض الدول مفروض منك تعين هانديكابس 2% من الناس ذوي الهمم، صح ولا لا؟ بعض الدول بتكون الغرامه تبعتها كم من $1000، فبالتالي بالنسبه للمؤسسه الغرامه تبعتها مش ماتيريال بالنسبه للبينالتي، ما عم نحكي عن التوبيك اكيد. فبالتالي تقدر تحسب الانهرنت ريسك، تقدر تعمل ميجرمنت للكنترولز الموجوده توصل بالنهايه للريزيدوال. ليش بنطبق الريكتك؟ الريكتك اي كومبلاينس اوفيسر بيشتغل از ريجوليشن. عدد التعليمات اللي اصدرها مصرف قطر المركزي او الجهات اللي بتنظم القطاع المالي بشكل عام في قطر كبير جدا، صح ولا لا؟ طب انا لسه عم بشتغل في مؤسسه ماليه بقطر، كيف بدي احدد شو الاشياء المطلوب مني اني انا اركز عليها، صح ولا لا؟ لابد انه السيستم يجي يحكي لي هاي هي الريجوليشنز اللي تعتبر هاي ريسك اريا في هاي المؤسسه. ليش؟ لانها مش ريفلكتد بالبوليسيز اند بروسيجرز، مش تستد، اخر مره نعملها فيزيت لسي قبل سنه او سنتين. بدل ما انا امسك بنسميه الرم او الريجوليتوري انفنتور ماتريكس، بدل ما امسك كل الريجوليشن واعملها اسسمنت من اول وجديد. ذاتس واي اللي بتحكي فيه الفاتف اللي هو ريسك بيس ابروتش، احنا بنطبقه ان ايفريثينج، بنطبقه بالام ال، بنطبقه بالسانكشنز، وبنطبقه بالريجوليتوري. هلا بجوز حضرتك تستغرب كيف بتطبقوه بالسانكشنز الريسك بيس ابروتش، خلص ما دام ديزيجنيتد المفروض انه ما تتعامل معه. لا، في بعض البرودكتس والسيرفيسز اللي احنا في المؤسسات الماليه بنقدمها بصراحه نوي اعمل عنها نيم سكرينينج. مثلا الاي سي سي، شيكات المقاصه، صعب جدا اعملها نيم سكرينينج لانه الاسم موجود بخط الايد، صح ولا لا؟ ولكن بنعتبر الريسك تبعها منخفض. ليش؟ لانها لوكال ترانزاكشن بالعمله المحليه، والاول هيز ماي كاستمر والبينيفيشري انذر قطري بانك كاستمر. فبالتالي بدنا نطبق الروبوتيك بروسيس اوتوميشن ونطبق الارتفيشال انتليجنس، ولكن بالترانزاكشن مونيتورنج او برفع تقارير الاشتباه الارتفيشال انتليجنس بده حذر. شكرا لك.
شكرا استاذ احمد، شكرا الدكتور ايهاب، شكرا الدكتوره ريم لهذا العطاء المتميز. ونصل الى التوصيات. تفعيل الامتثال ومعرفة التجانس بين الممارسات والتشريع والقانون في القطاع العام والخاص. تعزيز الإجراءات التنفيذية والأنظمة الرقابية التي تتماشى مع ممارسة الأعمال في القطاع المالي والتي تتوافق مع مفهوم الامتثال ومكافحة الجرائم المالية. الأخذ بالوسائل الحديثة المستخدمة في مواجهة الأزمات المالية والتغييرات الاقتصادية والأحداث الكبرى، سواء من الناحية التشريعية أو من ناحية الممارسة التكنولوجيا والأمن السيبراني للمعلومات. ضرورة نشر الوعي المالي وكيفية التعامل مع الجرائم المالية من خلال فئات المجتمع، وهي أفضل الوسائل والأدوات لنشر الوعي. جودة العمل وسرعة الأداء والتواصل مع الجهات الرقابية لتتبع الانحرافات وتقيد أعمال الجرائم المالية. حضورنا الكريم، في الختام نتقدم بخالص الشكر والتقدير لجميع المشاركين والداعمين والحضور على هذا العطاء القيم في مؤتمر الامتثال الفعال لمكافحة الجرائم المالية. وباسمكم جميعا نشكر جمعية المحاسبين والقانونيين القطرية ومعهد الامتثال العالمي GCI على تنظيم المؤتمر. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أختكم رجاء السليمي.